This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you. I hope you're well. The Mayor of London's here tomorrow, so you can fill your ULEZ boots to your heart's content. What time's he in? 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock tomorrow. You can speak to Sadiq, and there's quite a lot you might want to put. We may even have to break the habit of a lifetime and go all in on the blooming ultra-low emission zone. So hold your horses on that one. I'm going to talk about reparations a little later in the programme. They've popped up quite a lot on my radar lately. And by radar, I mean in the news, in the papers, in the media. And there is a proper dichotomy emerging. There's a proper tension between people who think it's absolutely inevitable that the descendants of slavers should face some form of financial penalty, and the descendants of slaves or the enslaved should face some sort of financial compensation, and people who, somewhat predictably, object furiously to the proposal. I'm minded to confine the conversation to people who know either that their ancestors were enslaved, or, because I'd like to be balanced, or know full well that the wealth into which they were born was built in large part on slavery. But that's coming up a little later in the programme. I'm going to begin with shoplifting. Oh, I may go a bit Brexity as well. I say a nice story. It's an horrible story about a quarter of the UK music industry workers having done no work in the European Union since Brexit. I just want to know what that means, what the ramifications of that are. But I need you to tell me. Is it just me, or is shoplifting a sort of unique crime? Is it the first crime you sort of become, if you're lucky, growing up, it's the first crime you sort of become aware of? One of your mates helps himself to a handful of pick and mix from Woolworths and gets grabbed by a store detective on the way out the door, or it's the first crime you witness, or the first crime you commit. I may, in the dim and distant past, have been caught shoplifting myself, but of course I couldn't possibly comment. I remember when I worked in a shop, I got into one semi-frightening situation. I had quite a weird manager. I don't think he liked me very much looking back. Good God. Do you know, this was 51 minus 23. This was 33 years ago. I've only just realised that he didn't like me very much. I've spent 33 years thinking that there was something wrong with him, and he had some sort of personality defect, but he just didn't like me. So I would get given, it was probably because I was quite posh. I'd get given all the rubbish jobs, and on one occasion he ordered me to follow a shoplifter, not chase. So there's a well-known shoplifter who would come into River Island in Worcester with a briefcase, and he was known from all around the West Midlands. So this chap I was working with had clocked him from a previous posting in another shop, and he would come in with a briefcase in a suit and tie, you see. And he would put 5 or 6 pairs of branded jeans at this period of history. Levi's 501s were the denim of choice. And he would put 5 or 6 pairs. And I think, what would they be going for 30 odd years ago? They'd be going for 50 or 60 quid, or am I imagining things? But anyway, they went for a chunk of change. And obviously, you'd then sell them on for probably half of the marked price. And it would be a fairly, what would you call it? It would be a fairly profitable exercise. And I got charged with following him. So I followed him. He clocked me. I think I still had my name badge on. I'd be rubbish undercover. He clocked me. And so I said, I haven't stolen anything. I haven't stolen. So he knew exactly what was going on. And I didn't really know what to do. So I just carried on following him. I must have been a little bit intimidated by this boss who I've just realised didn't like me. So I thought, well, I can't go back to the shop empty-handed. So I just sort of stood there. I remember it now vividly. I stood there on Worcester High Street while this little fellow with a briefcase, just sort of started shouting at me. And it culminated in him opening his briefcase and going, look. So we'd obviously clocked him before he'd started thieving, but the manager had told me not to come back empty-handed. And yet the briefcase was empty. I can't remember the rest of the story. I must have gone back. I mean, otherwise I'd still be there now. I must have gone back and said he didn't steal anything, and presumably the manager didn't believe me. But he already disliked me, so, it couldn't get any worse. He accused me of stealing once. This was very strange. I was up a ladder in the stock room, and my the label on my boxer shorts must have been poking out the back of my trousers. And I came down the ladder, and he was at the bottom of the ladder, passing me shoe boxes. I came down the ladder, And about 2 hours later, he called me into his office and he said, I noticed that you were wearing some of our boxer shorts. I said, pardon? He said, I noticed you're wearing River Island boxer shorts. And I've just looked in the staff register where you had to register everything that you bought with taking advantage of the staff discount. And you never registered. I said, I got them for Christmas off my mum. Literally a Christmas present. You've just accused me of steal. Very strange little period of my career, that. I mention it. There is a reason. I mention it because that gives you an idea of how high the security levels were in retail 32 years ago, give or take a few months. 32 years ago. And not only were the shop staff charged with trying to collar shoplifters, but they were even trying to collar their own colleagues, in my case. In fact, there was another one. They did catch someone who'd nicked a jacket. They saw him out in it on a Saturday night. And I wouldn't have taken a picture, would they? Because camera phones weren't commonplace. But they clocked that he'd got a jacket and then hauled him into the office on the Monday and asked him where it had come from. I mention this because the level of security was immense. You used to have store detectives roaming not just individual stores, but also town centres. So I think that several shops in Kidderminster would club together, and the bloke who would be patrolling Woolworths would also have a quick scoot around WH Smith's. So look, the presumption was that they would be pushing back against shoplifting. I'm not imagining that. I wonder what age you'd have to be to think that I'm speaking a foreign language. Because today, and I've checked, so there was a very interesting column in the Times yesterday, which appeared under the headline, "A shoplifting epidemic is going unpunished." Britain's high streets are suffering soaring rates of increasingly brazen theft, yet police lack the resources to tackle it. You were probably aware of that sort of swoop, if you like, on Oxford Street a couple of weeks ago, when hundreds of teenagers who'd sort of collaborated and cooperated on TikTok and Snapchat were expecting to take part in a mass robbery. They turned up in balaclavas and gloves. They were all supposed to pile into JD Sports at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. There'd been a successful, I call it a looting spree on an Oxford Street, one of those dreadful sweet stores, those US-style candy stores, the year before. This time the police were warned and prepared. And they stuck a dispersal zone around the entire area for 48 hours. But there was still trouble. There was still bother. That wasn't what drew my eye, actually. That it was bizarrely a reference to a part of London very near where I live, and the local news websites. It's made the Times newspaper, and it talks about the Chiswick Calendar reporting that Whistles now routinely locks its doors after being intimidated by aggressive drug addicts taking clothes. Space NK says it's being terrorised by a Romanian gang and preyed on by regular customers. I didn't get the second bit. Does that mean that people going in to buy 80 quid bottles of perfume are helping themselves to some incense sticks at the same time? Jigsaw says the gang that routinely stole its clothes over 6 months came in to just laugh at staff. Ryman and Vision Express have had their windows smashed. Delis and charity shops are openly stolen from, and staff feel scared and abandoned. Police issue a crime number, which I think makes you entitled to insurance, doesn't it? But they don't do anything about it. So I've got a pal in with me today. He's brought his boy in on work experience, and he runs a Tshirt Empire based in Uxbridge in West London, and I said to him, "Do you have a problem with this business?" He goes, "Yeah, we don't really have people in the shop anymore. It's more of a workshop now. It's more of a place of manufacture where we print up the stuff, because you'd have kids coming in, and we had some fancy American imports on coat hangers in the front of the shop, and they go into the fitting room, and you know what they're doing. They're putting a T-shirt on underneath the clothes they've come in, and then they just walk out. He said, "What am I going to do?" He said, "I'm not going to go and grab a 14-year-old boy." It's just the era that we live in makes that unthinkable. There was one occasion when a plainclothes copper was in the shop and saw someone else stealing, saw a teenage lad stealing, and the copper went for him. The copper got him in a headlock and was prepared to march him down to the station. You have to leave the premises first, don't you, before you can be accused or convicted, but that's someone who knows exactly what they're doing. That's a plainclothes police officer who is supremely confident of the law and what he is and isn't allowed to do. I imagine, and I'm going to use a slightly inappropriate word at this point, but I imagine that a regular shoplifting teenager, if you were to grab them, they'd just shout, well, a word that rhymes with speedo, wouldn't they? They'd just shout something like that, and quite rightly, the climate that we live in at the moment would automatically coalesce to protect. So I mean, there's a couple of things about this story I don't get. The first is the financial aspect of it. I presume that you now factor it in. How much do you factor in? You used to call it wastage when I was in retail, but we were really working. Well, I worked at Aquascutum as well on Regent Street. It's bizarre, this, isn't it? It's a topic that I've actually got personal experience of, albeit that it's all 3 decades out of date. It was a huge part of our job. We had cashmere overcoats that were chained up in the shop where I worked, and on one occasion we caught someone with wire cutters. He walked in with what he was going to clip, and those coats were going for about £1,200 a pop 30 years ago. So, that was, I presume, a very lucrative business. But what I'm saying is, and we like these conversations, where it's not my day-itis, not by any stretch of the imagination, but I do like stories about how much things have changed under our noses without us really noticing. You take the two extremes, where a big part of my job when I worked in retail was anti-shoplifting awareness, or whatever you want to call it, up to and including following suspects around the town centre, hoping to catch them in the act of taking jeans out of their briefcase or whatever it was I was supposed to do that day. Up to today, where even a shop owner will say, "There's nothing I can do. I know what they're doing. I know that they're doing it. So I just have to let it slide. I just have to let it slide." And then I opened the newspaper today to read about a shop where I bought my last pair of gloves. That's how bizarre this story is for me. LA Menswear, which is on Turnham Green Terrace, just off Chiswick High Road. I appreciate that if you're listening in Abu Dhabi, these references to my particular corner of West London are going over your head, but it's making national news because it's just an example of a much more widespread issue. LA Menswear, just off Chiswick High Road, is one of several businesses that have been targeted by thieves in recent weeks. This is forget my retail career. You know what this is? This is my journalism career in a bloody nutshell. This is a story that's been unfolding literally on my walk home, and I am supremely unaware of it. I think I've even been into these shops in the last couple of weeks. But the level of targeting is such that they are now locking the doors. You've got the little, that's a small independent shop. You've got Whistles round the corner where customers have been told that we're open, but we are operating a locked door policy. There's an optician's round the corner that describes an increase in theft and threatening behaviour towards our team. And this is absolutely normal behaviour. Well, not normal, is it? But it's commonplace behaviour. Our customers have been really understanding, says another shopkeeper on the same street, but we've had jewellery stolen. We don't have products that typically people can resell for a lot, but we're still having to deal with it. So, I mean, what's happened is the first question I'll ask. What's happened to create an air of impunity? Because you wouldn't have had police strolling up and down in uniform relatively recently. It can't just be that. A lack of resources means presumably that regular recidivists, I love that word, repeat offenders know that they're safe. And then the third element of it is the real mystery. It's the kind of, how has it been allowed to? What do you do now? What do you do? Do you just factor it in? You're locking your doors. So if you're a small business person, or indeed a big business person, then just tell me what you think has happened. 0345 6060 973. And then just thinking about my mate watching someone walk out of his shop with stolen goods. How blatant has it become in your neck of the woods? How blatant is it now? Is there any way back? I'm doing it again, aren't I? I'm bombarding you with questions. Listen, answer any of them or none of them. The numbers stays the same. I'm sort of loosely doing a shoplifting, eh? What's that all about? 0345 6060 973. I don't know how old I'm sounding, but I can't quite believe the scale of the problem that I've been reading about and listening about in the last couple of days. You'd always notice it. There'd be regular scuffles in the Swan Centre in Kidderminster when I was growing up because they caught someone trying to get out of Boots with a bottle of, what would it be in those days? No, Jupe was a little bit later. Jupe was about 1990. It'd be a bottle of Kuros. Be a bottle of Koros or a bottle of white linen for your nan. And there would be regular scuffles in the Swansea. It just doesn't... So what? I mean, I don't want to encourage anybody to take up shoplifting. I'm sure Ofcom would have something to say about that. But is there any obstacle? Is there any reason why, if you were dishonest, you wouldn't... I mean, all right, you know what the question is now. Let's get some answers on the board. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. I know, well, you're all right. If you're quick, come on, 0345 6060 973. And just for the record, a few of you... It's a slightly unpleasant inquiry. I'm not responsible for any of these thefts in Chiswick. I just want to make that absolutely clear from the outset.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10 is the time. Jack's piled in early. What's happened, James, he writes, is that the country has no shame. I'm convinced that Barnard Castle was the turning point. There's no shame at the top, so why should we at the bottom follow the rules? I also think it's loosely related to the surge in alt-right conspiracy theories. The tripe going around social media about how big business is trying to kill us, so we should take it all back, gets blurred around the edges and people see it as an excuse to act how they want when they want. I like this analysis. Very deep. I wish the working class would realise that when they steal from a corner shop, they're stealing from another working class member of society. 22 after 10 is the time. Hannah is in Marylebone. Hannah, what would you like to say?
Hi. We've had a family business for over 50 years, and so we've been, having shoplifting problems for ages. But we've been working on a lock door system for about 20 years now.
Gosh, is it quite a high-end boutique, Hannah?
We are.
Yes.
We are.
I don't know how. I just presumed from where you are and the fact that you've had a lock door policy for 20 years. That's the image I got.
Quite right. But it's not brilliant for business doing that because it's very off-putting. It makes you look like you're a bit standoffish. Why can't I just come in?
Yes.
But it's the only way. It's just the two of us working there, so it's a way to protect ourselves, protect our clients as well, because you also get people that come in and try to steal somebody's handbag. Doesn't stop them,
yes,
but it slows them down. It's just like we also to prevent ram raiders or steamers coming in.
Yes.
We alternate hangers so that you can't lift up 10 items at the same time off the rail.
I used to do that in River Island.
Yeah,
I used to do that.
Otherwise, you can clear a shop. You can clear a shop.
And that's what they do. They'd come in, they'd grab a whole rail of jeans, and then they'd run out again. No, clever.
Exactly.
They're sort of like late. So given that, though, have you noticed a recent change then, or are you just describing a sort of business as usual?
I'm just describing as business as usual. We also in the street we phone one another and say, "I've just had one in. Watch out, they look like this." So we immediately, you've got the door closed, and it's suddenly, we're closed for lunch. You do something that just avoids the situation, because I wouldn't want to have to confront a shoplifter. I mean, my mum in the old days in the 70s, she actually locked herself in the shop, locked it with a key, and said, "Until you give me the stuff back, you're not leaving."
With the shoplifter in there. Well, we laugh,
there,
and I appreciate my introduction was quite flippant, but it did occur to me as soon as I stopped speaking that this is quite a fearful scenario that you described.
It is. But it goes with hand in hand with being a retailer.
I guess what has changed is the consequences now. If you were to emulate your mother's approach,
you get into so much trouble.
Well, you would probably get done for false imprisonment. Well, I don't want to turn into one of those phone-in. You probably get done for false imprisonment.
Somebody's got a knife or something like that. In those days, it was a slightly less violent society.
And if the police did turn up, it seems to me almost impossible that that things would go any further than a crime number.
Well, yeah, if you're even lucky enough for them to turn up, unfortunately. I mean, I have to say, I haven't touch wood had to contact the police.
Good.
But I know that most retailers don't even bother, because you just get, I mean, we had it once where we were told off for having expensive items in our window, and you're kind of, but that's our display. What are we supposed to do?
Oh dear! I mean, I'm not laughing. Well, I am laughing, but with you, not at you. Obviously, the idea. Well, do you think you could possibly review the way in which you entice people into your shop? I mean, you've got to stop showing your wares in the window in the hope of tempting people in. Otherwise, you might tempt people in. You can't really deter shoplifters from coming in without also deterring customers from coming in. Hannah, thank you. Debbie's in Marlow. Debbie, what would you like to say?
Oh, morning, James.
Hello,
I'm
Debbie.
Slightly breathless, but I'm not
surprised. It's probably the most exciting thing that's going to happen to you all day, isn't it, talking to me?
Oh, you know me so well.
Carry on.
So, yeah, I've just recently started working in a fashion boutique in the lovely Marlow. And the wonderful thing is there's an independent retailer who's had enough of this petty shoplifting. And she set up a WhatsApp group with camera shots, and they get fed around all the stores to say, "High alert, there's so-and-so going on, and this has stolen something from White Stuff or
and
White Company.
What are we talking about? Opportunists or organised thieves?
I think it's organised, because
Right.
the latest was these wonderful 3 girls who were, well, let's say, in the tightest dress known to man, so who knows where they were going to stash anything.
Yes.
They had a sausage dog with them,
Right.
which obviously was a decoy for attention. But they grabbed bits and pieces, stuffed them wherever they could. No doubt they had a bag somewhere. And then they came towards our store. Our policy is just to stare at them, give them loads of attention, which they get fed up with.
So you're told not
disappear.
to approach them or to accuse them or to accost.
Well, no, we can, but it's more fun playing with them, really.
Okay.
And just winding them up. So then they just blatantly walked over and sat in the pub opposite. And so we told the other retailers who'd been had problems from them. And so a couple of the retailers, the more independent ones, went up and eyeballed them and said, give us our stuff back.
Right.
Ironically, they were sat there with their dad.
Oh, Lord.
So it was that was just the worst part, really.
So there's no intervention here from authority at all. So no one thinks it's even worth calling the police.
There's no police presence. There's just a really gung-ho woman who runs a really successful independent shop who's had enough and just tries to get all the other retailers to stick together and
it on
look out
herself.
for each other.
And if you don't do that, then you end up with the sort of scenario that was described in the Times yesterday, and that item I shame was a little bit sniffy about, or at least unconvinced. It sounded like something out of that film The Warriors come out to play. I just couldn't see it being feasible in a salubrious West London suburb. Debbie, thank you. I think it's important to make the point about the cost of living. You can never excuse crime or theft, but a couple of you wondering whether this is a symptom not of some form of social malaise or breakdown, but a symptom of desperation, and that people who would never ordinarily consider thieving are reduced to it. I don't know. Mike in Brentwood gets an early ticket into Idiot's Corner this morning. He writes, "Welcome to your world. The liberal left have created this. Do what you like with no repercussions." Well, it's certainly true of your spelling, Mike, but I don't think necessarily that massive cuts to the police force undertaken by 13 years of Tory governments can be laid at the feet of the Liberal left, Mike. But you crack on. Vari is in Streatham. Vari, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. How
Hello.
are you?
I'm very well. I'm confused and unhappy about the plight of the people who are ringing in, but also a bit embarrassed to be so unaware of it.
Well, I think it's easy to be unaware of it because it's okay. So to explain, I have a pop-up shop in a shopping centre in South London.
Oh yes.
And my pop-up shop happens to be near a bit of an ASB hotspot because it's next to a McDonald's. So
What's
there's
ASB?
a lot of
What's ASB? Antisocial behaviour. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I've seen it all. And, I've got a couple of anecdotes for you because I personally think there's 2 things going on.
Yes.
So, first anecdote is another pop-up shop owner in the centre who just doesn't come in anymore because she was targeted by teenage girls. And it wasn't so much that she was targeted by teenage girls, but it was the level of organisation that they showed. So they came in looking dishevelled. They came in looking as if someone had grabbed them.
Yeah.
And, they did that, in her opinion, so that if she did try and grab them or say something, that they could claim that they had been assaulted by her.
So they already looked like they'd been assaulted.
Yeah.
And therefore anyone arriving later, look what she's done to me sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Gosh.
So that really intimidated her because, of course, what a teenager might not realise is if you're accused of something like that, that could ruin your life.
Yes, of course it could, yes.
So, so there's that. And I think, I've seen in my 3.5 years of being there, lots of my clients coming back in tears because they've been targeted by very organised criminal gangs who, because I work with babies and toddlers. So,
Okay.
they'll leave my shop, they'll go to the bookshop next door, which has got a children's section, and then their phone's in Walthamstow by 6 o'clock. And, there's nothing that the police can or will do.
Why is that bit? Why is it? Because there used to be. Half my mates got a police caution in the 1980s for shoplifting at some point. So what's happened there? Just too busy. Just haven't literally got the bodies. I mean, we've talked a lot about them not going to actual house breakings anymore because they haven't got the bodies. But so shoplifting would be further down the list than that, wouldn't it?
I think so. I mean, there's a really good police presence in the area that I'm in. They've actually got a town centre police team, so it's better serviced than most areas in London. And they're bloody great. They worked really hard, these officers. But, you know, the last time so what the teenagers do is they'll organise things on Snapchat or whatever.
Right.
And the last time there was a major invasion of this particular centre, I saw a TikTok of punching one of the police team in the face outside of my shop.
Yeah.
I mean, I just shut my shop when it gets like that. I mean, I'm lucky because I don't really sell things. I'm more of a service provider, so I don't have a lot of them
so you haven't got the
but
easily transferable goods and what are we thinking as well with clothes? Are they nicking them to sell or nicking them to wear? Or is that a silly question?
Well, I think, what's interesting about the woman downstairs for me that got targeted is they targeted her on the run up to Mother's Day. So they were obviously looking for things to either sell on to their mates, or they wanted a Mother's Day present for their mum and they didn't have the money and this was their solution. So I think with teenagers, I don't think they're that organised. I could be wrong. I mean, I've got clients who would probably know.
Yeah.
Possibly, but they have tricks and they have ways. And I think
once it becomes something that doesn't send frissons of fear and fear of consequences through a group of kids. I mean, kids do stuff without thinking all the time. And this is just one of those examples of if I'm not going to get into any trouble, then but why wouldn't I do it? It's mad, isn't it? I wonder if it's another thing that if it was happening, well, it's happening in Chiswick. There you go. Ah, God, I'm sorry. I've done it again, haven't I? It's happening in Chiswick, so now it's in the news. All right, quite a smart part of town. Presumably, this has been going on in less salubrious suburbs for ages, and the great chattering classes and the media elite have only just got around to noticing it. 10:32 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:35 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Lee says the door was kicked wide open for antisocial and criminal behaviour by our utterly degenerate populist world leaders, as well as the obvious money-grabbing corruption of their acolytes, particularly in the UK. I don't know, really, Lee. I mean, it's chicken and egg, perhaps, but I suspect that you probably, or some of your mates would probably have indulged in this sort of behaviour if they were supremely confident of there being no consequences, or they weren't remotely intimidated by whatever consequences were in place. I need to give you the email. I'm going to give you a special secret password, all right, that no one else gets this, just you. And it allows you to get your question in front of the Mayor of London tomorrow ahead of everybody else listening. So this is just for you. And I can give you a little bit of inside information. If your question's not about you, Les, it's got a slightly better chance of making it to the top of the pile. And I say that only because we've already got 3 million on you, Les, which we will be asking. But I'll be grateful for variety, shall we say, tomorrow. But also stick your ULEZ questions in there as well. Or come one, come all. What you need to do is this. You go to lbc.co.uk/question. So you write that into your search bar, lbc.co.uk/question. And then we will I'll ask it on your behalf, or we'll queue you up to ask it on the show tomorrow. He's in a little bit of bother, the Mayor. Telegraph reporting possible finagling of some of the scientific evidence that he insists justifies the introduction of the ULEZ. Now, listen, I appreciate the pain of having to pay money that you can't afford. I don't want anyone to think I underestimate that irritation and whatever you call it. But I will not apologise for finding the subject deathly dull. Any radio phone-in subject that hinges on motoring is it's the radio equivalent of pulling teeth. Why do we say pulling teeth? Because it's painful. Is that because that's all a dentist does. It's a bit unfair on dentists, that, isn't it? Every your worst ever day at work is compared to a dentist's every day at work. How does a dentist feel when you say it's like pulling teeth? What do you mean it's like pulling teeth? I pull teeth every day. I think you're speaking from the patient's, but it's like having teeth pulled is probably what we mean when we say. Anyway, that's all tomorrow. So get on board with that by going to that little secret thing I just gave you. Zara is in Leeds. Zara, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, just listening to your conversation. So I worked in retail from the age of 16 to just 32 when I got made redundant in 2021. And there's such a massive difference from when I started.
Your phone line's gone south since you came on, Zara. It's not your fault. It's not our fault. It's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. We'll try and get you back on, I promise. 10:38 is the time. I want more of the why of it alongside the what of it. How has this happened? Intelligent, informed answers, please. Teresa is in Manchester. Teresa, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
So I'm an ex-police officer. Quit about 4 or 6 months ago now.
Okay.
And I used to work frontline.
Hang on a minute. You quit about 4 to 6 months ago?
Yeah, we spoke a while ago.
I thought we had done. You hadn't quit then, had we? You?
I spoke to you on a day that I was handing in my notice.
You'd had enough.
So, yeah.
Carry on.
It's a very, very difficult job. But a lot of my career was spent frontline.
Yes.
So the officers that would turn up when the shops call 999 and go, hey, I've got a shoplifter.
Right.
So I really, really, really want to make it clear I'm not blaming the shops.
Sure.
But it's a really difficult thing to prove sometimes, shoplifting.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's a piece of cake. You know, you've got your security guard, or you've got your member of staff, and they've seen Bob the shoplifter run in, grab whatever and run out again.
Yes.
So they call 999. Is Bob still at the shop?
Yes.
No, he's gone. He's gone. Of course he's gone. Okay, well, now it gets downgraded. Yeah, because it's not
so
a 999
there's no immediate
call.
Threat to anybody or
exactly.
Whatever. Yeah,
the offender is not on scene. For the shop, that's horrendous because potentially if the police turn up now, we might find him before he sells it, before he stashes it. But for the police, it's not an emergency anymore because he's not there. Offender's not on scene. Then the next thing we have is we turn up at the shop and the member of staff who saw it isn't there. They've gone home. Because of course they've gone home. Because they're not going to hang around for the police. It's the end of their shift. They're going home.
Right.
So now the police officer, who's on a rolling cycle of day shifts, night shifts, late shifts, has to try and find a time when the member of staff who saw it is in. Really difficult. Then because we can't really book an appointment. It's hard to book an appointment because we can say, we'll be there at 10 o'clock, and then something awful happens. There's a horrible RTC, there's a horrible whatever, and we can't be there at 10 o'clock. So now the shop thinks we're awful.
Yeah, this is very compelling and detailed, and it fills in an awful lot of the gaps that I've got. But there's one big gap that you haven't addressed.
Yeah, go on.
Which is, why did it used to be so different?
Because we had more police officers.
Is it that simple?
Because we had more police officers. Yeah, because more police officers could go. We had PCSOs. A PCSO, Police Community Support Officer, they can take a statement. And they don't go to car crashes. They don't go to domestic violence incidents. They can schedule their time. They can say to the shop, right, okay, so Sam, the shop assistant's going to be here at 10 a.m., is she? I'll be here at 10 a.m. And they can be there. But a frontline police officer can't promise because they can be on their way to the shop. Oh, please can you go and deal with this man and woman having a huge, great big fight in the street with their kids screaming?
And why don't shops? I mean, would the cost of hiring a security guard be higher than the losses that they're making? Because to look at it from the other end of the telescope, from the shopkeeper rather than the police officer, I'm just thinking, why? I mean, a big shop,
and some do.
Yeah, but little shops can't, can they? Because it's another member of staff.
Well, that's it. And the other thing we get when we get there is there's no CCTV. And it's so difficult.
Even if there is, it's not much. It's about as much use as a chocolate teapot usually, isn't it? CCTV.
It is, because the quality's poor.
Yeah.
They buy the best quality CCTV they can, and they play it and they go, look, you can see it's him, but you can't unless you know it's him. And
even if you get a collar, it's 3 years before anyone's in court these days.
Exactly. And the shop, it's so much time out of the shop assistant or the shop manager's day now.
It's mad, isn't it? You just don't notice it unravelling slowly in front of you. And I remember it was in your patch, actually, when she stood up, Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, stood up at the Police Federation conference. Do you remember? And said that
Theresa May.
Well, we might have to. Cutting police numbers won't have any effect. It will have no effect whatsoever on police ability to solve crimes or to attend scenes of crimes. I forget her exact words, but it was absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah, and the thing is, it doesn't have an effect. It sounds ridiculous to say it doesn't have an effect as such. We can do it, but it's slow.
Yeah.
And it relies on everybody else working round us. And, so we can't make it there straight away, but it's okay if you've got really high quality CCTV.
Right.
But you haven't because it's really expensive.
And even then, you've got to recognise the fella or the woman who's done it. It's
exactly.
a mad situation, isn't
it? And it's insane.
What are you going to do next?
Oh, I've got my own business now. It's great. I'm self-employed. I love it.
Oh,
or did you mean what do the police do next?
No, I meant you personally, actually.
Oh no, I'm so much happier.
Good, you sound it.
There will be.
You sound a lot bouncier. You sound a lot bouncier.
I'm packing to go on holiday. It's great. But
I finished my book this morning. I pressed send on my new book this morning, so I'm feeling pretty bouncy too. Although I'm crashing now because I got up at 4:30.
Oh, bless you.
Yes.
But what I would say, James, if you'll give me the opportunity, there'll be police officers listening to this. I know police officers personally who are destroying their mental health. Their lives are ruined, their health are ruined. I've got really high cholesterol, I've got this, that and the other.
Yeah.
There's life outside.
Well,
I hate saying that people should consider their life outside, but I know so many police officers who are so chronically sick from the job, and there's life outside. There really is. It doesn't have to be self-employed. That can be scary.
No, I hear you, and I agree with you, and I endorse this message with an extra caveat, because I like to bring this into everything that we discuss on the programme, with an extra caveat that, of course, if they become so poorly that they have to take time off work, they'll soon be under attack in a Daily Telegraph editorial or Daily Mail column as being part of this new problem of the long-term off work, where nobody stops to wonder why some people are taking significant amounts of time off work because of their poor health, and it's because they're working under enormous pressure, which in the public service will have been caused by austerity, which after 13 years of Tory rule, they're not even trying to blame on anybody else anymore, apart from our friend in Brentwood, who's trying to blame cuts to the police service on the Liberal left. After 13 years of Tory rule, they're probably going to try and blame it on people in small boats by tea time today.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. Like Teresa, Jason is a former police officer. He's retired from the Met. He's just texted me the following. These are the current official figures from the Police Federation, James. A record 9,192 police officers in England and Wales have quit in the 12 months to March. That's the most in a financial year since comparable records began. So although the government insists that they are recruiting record numbers are leaving as well. I think the smoke and mirrors are now normal. I don't know how you describe that. Do you remember the hall of mirrors when we were kids? Do you remember you'd go in and you'd look all wobbly, or you'd look really fat or really thin, or your head would be 5 times the size of your shoulders or something like that? What they call distorting mirrors. And we now live in a world where that is normal. Everything is distorted. So what's going to take you by surprise if you bump into a normal mirror? You're not going to recognise yourself, because it's not distorting. I think the smoke and mirrors are everywhere, and there's a really good, we are recruiting record numbers of police officers. We are opening 40 hospitals. Now, I mentioned a moment ago to Teresa that, and thank you for all the kind words, everybody's been following this saga. I can now say that I have finished my new book, and I feel incredibly liberated and very excited by it. But the last chapter I wrote was the Liz Truss chapter. There's 10 chapters picking on 10 individuals responsible, in my opinion, for breaking Britain. And today we're talking about another symptom of broken Britain that didn't make the cut. But the Liz Truss chapter was very short and very interesting, because a large part of her propulsion to power was built on pretending that these trade deals she was signing, that were largely either cut and paste jobs with European Union trading partners that we were already party to, or, as we saw in the case of Australia, arrangements that were signed to the detriment of our national interest. Minette Batters, the NFU, furious about the Australian trade deal. I played you a clip not long ago of Australian television presenters in a studio, live on air, laughing at the state of the trade deal, because it was essentially giving them everything they wanted and giving us very little in return. So that Brexit brain-boiling exercise got Liz Truss all the way into Downing Street. I pressed send on that literally this morning. And then I got to work and saw the front page of the Daily Express. Landmark deal proves Brexit voices of doom are wrong. As Liz Truss disappears stage left, or stage right actually, here, stage even righter, or stage far right, here comes Kemi Badenoch, who is now doing exactly the same thing that Liz Truss did, to suck up to the right-wing newspapers and gaslight the Conservative Party membership, who will be responsible for choosing the next Tory leader. It is, and I've finished the book now, so I can't even add in a line about, and by August the 23rd, 2023, Kemi Badenoch had adopted exactly the same busted flush in order to try to propel herself to prominence. It's incredible, right? What's happened here? That's just another example. So Jason's police numbers, Boris Johnson's 40 hospitals, and now these ludicrous attempts to claim that, in this case, a trade deal with India would somehow atone for the loss of frictionless trade with our largest historical trading partner. And I mean, listen, I'm supremely comfortable, as you know, with people coming here to work in the hope of improving their lives. But a hell of a lot of people who voted for Brexit told me that it was the brown ones they didn't want here. And if you think India are coming into a negotiation with the United Kingdom from a position of weakness, then, well, I've got a rather large bridge I'd like to sell you. 10:15. And speaking of bridges, of course, the Garden Bridge. I don't think that made the book. Oh, I've got to stop doing this. All I'm going to do now for the next 2 months is remember things that I didn't get into the... I'll tell you what, you can take my mind off things by pre-ordering it. Just go and have a look at my Twitter profile. You'll find a link there. I mean, this is madness. Absolute madness. And I can't see any way back. Shoplifting is just normal. It is the new normal. What does a reversal look like? Zara's in Leeds on a better phone line. Zara, where were we?
Yeah, so I was just saying that I worked in retail for nearly 17 years before I got made redundant in 2021.
I'm sorry.
And the massive difference in from when I started as a 16-year-old to when I left as a store manager and the things that we had to deal with. So I know you're talking about shoplifting, but my main thing was sort of on the back of what happened after the shoplifting. So we were dealing with people trying to return things, abuse, aggression from them stealing in the first place.
So they'd nick something and then try and swap it for money?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then when you weren't maybe going to give them a refund and you were only offering them an exchange, then people would get violent. I've had a few violent things happen to me. I got punched. I've had needles pulled out against me. I had a member of staff punched. We've had sort of really major incidents, and I think a big part of it is that there's not enough staff.
So keeping costs down in the shops, not just in the police, keeping numbers down.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, I mean, when I started in a small shop, and we would have five members of staff.
Yeah, you're right.
When I left, I was in an enormous shop, and we'd have 4 members of staff.
I wonder how many people are in the menswear department in River Island on Worcester High Street right at this very moment in time. Because when I was there, there'd be 5 or 6 of us.
We had a 2-floor store and we had 4 members of staff. One of us had to run upstairs when a customer went up there. So you were upstairs on your own, sometimes with 5 or 6 people up there. I mean, we got raided.
Sorry.
It was
and
insane.
of course, from the shop's point of view, they're now dealing with the online competition, which wasn't in place when I worked in shops, or it wasn't really in place when you started. So that you understand why they've got to be shaving their costs at every corner.
Cost cutting makes sense when you think about it logically. The high street's quieter, people are shopping online.
Yeah.
But then for example, my store went from having a yearly loss of 5% up to 17% the next year.
Wow. What year was that? What year, can you remember?
That was between sort of 2018 and 2020.
Wow.
And then it's progressively got worse. We never got back down. We've never, ever got back down from like 15%.
Well, it's factored in now. That is it. That's normal. That is the new normal. Can I ask you a question? Will you promise to give me an honest answer? And don't worry about embarrassing me. All right. But when you heard me on the radio this morning describing my shock at what is happening in my own leafy suburb of West London, was there a little bit of you that thought, welcome to the real world, mate? That's been going on where I am for years.
To be honest, the town that I worked in, there was a high number of drug addicts.
Right.
So we were dealing with addiction and people that were just desperate. And you could tell that they were absolutely desperate. Yeah. So having needles pulled on you, things like that, it was just kind of a weekly occurrence, which sounds really bad. It was to the extent where we had to get the security guard to come with us when we had to go out back to the bin, because the chances are you'd go outside and there'd be someone getting ready to inject or whatever, just sat next to the bin.
No, yeah, you're right, though. It does create a different set of circumstances, I think, although I mean, that mode of crime has always been commonplace among those people. It was, addicts will do anything, won't they, to get, I sound like some old geezer now, to get their next fix. But it is true, and that notion of impunity and not caring about consequences doesn't have the same heft when you're talking about drug addicts that it has when you're not. because addiction robs you of inhibition and fear of consequences. The big social change is people who are not drug addicts. Shoplifting on an industrial scale, secure in the knowledge that nothing will happen. It's incredible. Thank you, Zara. Take care. Jim's in Manchester. Jim, what would you like to say?
Yeah, just, James, my position allows me to be privy to some information from one of the big four supermarkets.
Oh, yeah.
That they used to have around about £80 million as one line in their P&L, their profit and loss statement, that was called shrinkage.
Yeah, shrinkage, not wastage. Sorry, I got that wrong. Shrinkage, yes.
Yeah,
well done.
Shrinkage.
Thank you.
Shrinkage is basically theft.
Yeah, and it could be shoplifting, or it could be staff. I mean, it could
exactly.
just anything
it could
that
be
didn't.
Anybody.
It went out of the shop without going past a till.
Yeah, exactly that. You could have a contractor that's done a job and he's thought, I'll have that. That'll do for me. And he puts in his toolkit and walks out with it.
Yeah.
So £80 million for this particular one of the big four supermarkets is now for this year £240 million.
Ooh, wow.
As a line in their P&L, that the lines in the P&L depend on the cost. And the first line that sits in the P&L after sales is people.
Yes.
Shrinkage used to be around line 14. It's now line 4.
Is it really?
And it's £240 million a year. And they accept that in their P&L because that's what they put in for shrinkage. And they're completely oblivious to how much walks out the door until they do stock takes. And those stock takes they do, because of the size of a supermarket, they'll do what's called perpetual inventory. They'll do a part of the store and then a part of the store and then a part of the store.
I mean, this is really interesting because these are calculations, surely, because they could be deploying resources to bring shrinkage down, couldn't they, or not? So you tell me.
The problem you've got is because of that first line in a P&L being people, they will not invest in more people to police their stores as staff.
So you'd just be moving money from that line to that line.
Exactly.
So you'd be putting.
So you write it off. You put what measures you can. You put a security guard who's probably not trained. He's just someone who looks the part, standing at a podium. And by the way, if you look at most of the podiums, the screens aren't working. Yes. Because it costs money to fix those security systems, and that money doesn't put money back in the till, so to speak. So let's not invest in it. And the security guards, for the reasons you've heard, will not take a lot of people on. So
this is essentially, that's why I keep using the phrase "the new normal," which was a pandemic phrase that we used a lot, wasn't it? But this is, that level of shrinkage is priced in. It's priced in to the budget, to the supermarket's budget and the supermarket's modus operandi.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, it's a bit scary, really, because...
But it's people not necessarily stealing for themselves. Some of these people have got a shopping list from their friends. They go in with a shopping list.
Of course.
And then they sell those goods to those friends at a knockdown price.
And some of these people are hungry as well. We can't
absolutely.
We cannot overlook that fact.
There are different factors that drive people's behaviour, and some of it is desperation.
Yeah, and there it is. I mean, it is cheaper to let it happen than it is to pay someone to stop it.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jim. Crikey, perfect point at which to call time on it. Apologies for being a bit late to the party on this one. I was aware of the problem. I was aware it was growing. I wasn't aware of quite where it had got to, and I think I should be embarrassed a little about the fact that I had to take a Times article, a Times columnist commenting on this issue from the perspective of my own local high street for me to really wake up to the problem. But better late than never, eh? It is just gone 11 o'clock. Up next, I want to talk about reparations. I can't remember the last time we did it, but the Gladstone family now have become the latest to apologise for their forebears' role in the slave trade. It's gaining momentum, this movement, and I want to know how we feel about that.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 11, and you are listening to to me, James O'Brien. Sorry, I got a bit distracted there. I often tell you the things that I regret most about our time together, don't I? I mean, you know, the obesity stuff and the horrible nickname I used to apply to people who are very overweight, and I share with you the process by which I came to see the error of my ways. There's one I don't tell you about very often, and I think it's because I haven't fully unravelled it. I don't quite know what was wrong with me. But if, for example, we were ever discussing an event linked to the Holocaust, which we have discussed a lot over the years. And you'll remember one of the most memorable callers that we ever had on the programme, the late, great Lily Pullman, who ended up coming on stage with us at the full disclosure just before the pandemic started, almost a week actually, that we were beginning to worry about COVID. And whenever I was doing a conversation about the Holocaust, don't forget, it's 20 years soon that I've been in this job. I would get phone calls, one or two phone calls from people of West Indian and or African descent who expressed unhappiness about the amount of attention that we paid to the Holocaust compared to the amount of attention that we paid to slavery. And I am somewhat ashamed to tell you that I was quite impatient with them. I hope I wasn't rude, but I certainly think back and fear that in my head at least, I would be thinking this has got nothing to do with the conversation that we're having. And I would therefore be impatient. You can probably tell sometimes when a caller comes on who I feel is not progressing, if we can use that word that way, not progressing the conversation. It's why I hate the motoring phone-ins, isn't it? Because you just hear the same grievance. Astonishingly, when you're talking about you, Les, it's the same tone of voice from all the callers. They all sound exactly the same. They say, well, I think it's a tax. So you can tell, I think, when I'm a little impatient with a caller who I don't think is making a sparkling contribution to the conversation that we're having. And I fear that I was a little impatient to people whose family history contained slavery, wondering why in the United Kingdom in the 21st century that conversation was conducted so much less often than conversations about family histories that had been affected by the Holocaust. It's not either or, of course, unless you're looking at it from a skewed perspective, or rather you're seeing skewed coverage. And I think now it's a really, really valid question, a really valid point. I don't know what the answer is, actually, to that question. I suspect a large part, if not the main part of the answer, is that we don't feel, we loosely as a society, or maybe even the gatekeepers of the national conversation, is probably reasonable. We have no complicity. We have no role in the Holocaust. We were, as a nation, our self-perception as a nation, we were responsible for ending it. We have done nothing to for which we might be held responsible, whereas the conversation about slavery is almost the polar opposite. So I think that's a large part. And I was only a kid when I started here. I wouldn't have worked that out. And if you told me, I wouldn't have understood. But of course, almost every stately home in the country has got slave money in its bricks and mortar. The sense of national shame at that Holocaust is something that we have been in denial about for my entire life as a country. And so as someone from that background, listening to powerful, moving, emotional conversations about another Holocaust, I understand completely the sense of grievance that you must have felt. I understand completely. And that's why I find the reparations conversation so interesting, because I think back in the day, I might have been part of the problem here. I think I might have been, in fact, not even that long ago, I might have thought that was a distraction from the broader, more important conversation about the reality of slaving, the reality of enslaving human beings. Reparations feels like, something fanciful. It also, of course, leaves the door open for racists to claim that the clamour for justice and truth is financially motivated. 9 minutes after 11 is the time. And it is a sad truth, but I think an inevitable one. It is a sad truth that this conversation in this country at this time will be driven by the descendants of slavers atoning for the actions of their ancestors. It will not be driven by the descendants of slaves demanding justice. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination suggesting that you are being excluded from the conversation. I'm just saying that a story about a descendant of a slave demanding justice or demanding an apology for what happened to your ancestors will not get the coverage that, for example, the descendants of William Gladstone, a Victorian Prime Minister, will get for announcing that they're going to travel to Guyana to apologise for their family's role in the slave trade. So William Gladstone's own father, John, was one of the biggest slave owners in the West Indies. This is why they remember the campaign against the National Trust that turned out to be coming from the same building as several of those lobby groups masquerading as think tanks. Incredible, really. But you remember the campaign against the National Trust for putting up history, for actually publishing history of the building that people were visiting. People objected to it because they didn't like the history. These are the people that think of themselves as free speech warriors. The people who don't want visitors to stately homes to find out about the stately homes. You remember that. So that is the context in which this stuff is happening. You don't want it to be common knowledge that a Victorian Prime Minister, quite a liberating or liberal Victorian Prime Minister, was only really in the ruling class. His access to the ruling class was built upon a fortune built on slavery, his father's slaving fortune. And, everywhere you go, you will encounter similar stories. This is a country built on slavery, the royal family. I think it was Charles II's brother. Would that be James? I think he kind of, he didn't invent it, but I think he was what we might call these days a very early adopter. Everywhere you go, David Harewood, who I think he'd let me say that he's a friend of mine. We did a lovely full disclosure interview during lockdown. David's a magnificent man, written incredibly powerfully about his own battles with mental health and the role that his race has played in both them and in his broader existence. And David is called Harewood, right? David Harewood. He's in 24 and all sorts of things. He is called Harewood because his ancestors were owned by the Earl of Harewood, right? And that's not abnormal. I got some... There's a footballer. There was a footballer a few years ago, and he had the same surname as a mate of mine from school. And I thought, that's a bit odd. How can they? Because it was quite a rare surname. And of course, the footballer was black. My mate's white. That lad's ancestors would have owned that football player's ancestors. And it's absolutely everywhere. Now, the reason that I, what's the word? Apologised? I don't know if it did. The reason I acknowledged earlier that I used to come at this issue and come to these conversations incorrectly and inappropriately is because I still don't have full confidence that I'll conduct them in the correct fashion. For example, I only just noticed that the only reason I'm talking about this today is because the white descendants of a white slaver are going to Guyana to apologise for their family's role in the slave trade. So I'm not entirely sure what the most responsible question to ask is. I am pretty sure that the conversation will be confined to families, descendants of slaves or slavers. I think that's an important addition. I don't really see any point in taking... Well, I can tell you the sort of calls you'd get on a slightly lazier format. You'll get lots of people ringing in to say, oh, are the Romans going to apologise to us? Or talking about how the Irish got enslaved as well, which is, really thick. So this conversation is about the British slave trade, the trade in black men and women from Africa via the West Indies that ended in the last century. But it's funny, isn't it? 2 words here, actually. You know how I like words. You've got repercussions, you've got reparations. The repercussions continue and the reparations don't exist. So the £20 million that the government set aside on the occasion of the Slavery Abolition Act in 1833, that's equivalent to about £2 billion. So a tiny fraction of the amount of money that Liz Truss managed to spaff up the wall when she was Prime Minister, but still a significant chunk of change. Do you know where that went, don't you? The 20 million pounds or 2 billion in modern money that the government set aside at the time of the Slavery Abolition Act in 1833. You know where that money went, don't you? Yeah, that went to the slave owners. All of it. And that was in 1833, so 190 years ago. I did that in my head. And sometimes when I tell you at 11:13 I don't know what question I'm going to ask you, I do it so that I hope by 11:15 I will know what question to ask you. Because there's a question I want to ask, but I think it might make me sound a bit stupid. What do you mean it's too late to start worrying about that? The question I think I am going to ask this, and actually it does apply to the slaver descendant as much as the slave descendant. So the Gladstones have spoken of their desire to go to Guyana to say sorry. He found out about his family's slave owning past. You see, there it is. You are, as the 2 times great grandson of a former prime minister, didn't even know that his dad owned 2,500 enslaved African people in Guyana and Jamaica. Didn't even know, because it's like this. It must have become a taboo so quickly, mustn't it? It must have gone from everybody being at it to everybody. It's going to be like Brexit one day. No one will admit they voted for it, in the same way that presumably within 20 or 30 years of the Slavery Abolition Act, no one admitted that they were filling their boots while it was legal. So he's talked about his shock. He said, I felt absolutely terrible. I really, really hated it. It was a shock and I felt absolutely sick. Slavery is a crime against humanity, and to have someone in the family involved in that is horrendous. And Gladstone even defended his father's slaveholdings during his early years in Parliament. So the family have now given £60,000 to fund a post to research the slave trade at University College London, £100,000 to set up a research department at the University of Guyana. They plan to make a formal public apology at the opening of the new International Institute for Migration and Diaspora Studies. And they join a growing list of descendants of slavers who feel it is their place and their duty to atone and apologise for the actions of their ancestors. He said, through this apology, I want to say to other families and other institutions, you can do this. And it's incredibly worthwhile for the people that you do it with. It's a game changer. And that's the question. How does it change the game? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. There's another family. There was a Trevelyan, wasn't it, a few months ago, I think. Laura Trevelyan, the BBC correspondent, stepped down from the Beeb to concentrate on is atoning the right word? I don't know, I'm a Catholic. Doing penance. How does it change the game? As someone who is conscious of the role that enslavement played in your family history, can you talk me, a complete ingenue or ignoramus, can you talk me through why it matters? So the question I was frightened of asking was, does it matter? But that is implicit in a question about why it matters. Why does it matter? I think I know, and I can come up with answers of my own, but I want to hear yours. We're going to see a lot more of this, and we're going to see a lot of the usual suspects pushing back against it and arguing against it and making lazy, cliched observations about everything from ancient Rome right through to modern Ireland, and that's fine. It won't happen on this show any more than conversations about the Holocaust permitted complaints about other tragedies. The trick is to do both separately, and that's what we're going to do now. 0345 6060 973. Why does it matter? Why does it, in the words of John Gladstone? No, that's actually the ancestor, isn't it? In the words of Charlie Gladstone. Why does it change the game? 0345 6060 973. And if you know that your family were on the slaving side of history, What do you feel about families coming forward to apologise? Everyone's welcome in this conversation. Everyone's welcome in every conversation. But I want to get this one right. Well, I say everyone. I'm completely excluding everyone who isn't in some way associated historically and familiarly with this vile practice. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. All right. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 11 is the time. Family of former British Prime Minister to apologise for links to the slave trade and, you know, the 2,500 human beings that were traded like chattels and belongings by William Gladstone's father, John. It probably represents something rather more than links to the slave trade, but I am interested today in what stories like this mean to you and your family. Okay, 0345 6060 973. When I started, I do remember callers or maybe booked guests on other programs saying things like, "What's the point of apologising? What's the point?" You know, it's different eras and different times, and yet when we have a national grievance, the idea that nobody should apologise for it is generally laughable. We'll get stuck right into this. 23 after 11. Ian's in Burton-on-Trent. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Being as though you're a connoisseur of the bourgeoisie, you will, as it were, on the left-wing spectrum of the bourgeoisie, you will recognise something here. That why is slavery significant? While the Bank of England, having taught us for about 20-odd years, made enormous amounts of profits out of dead bodies going on the second phase of the slave triangle. And that's one of the untold truths about all of this. So the movement forward for capitalism was on the backdrop of West African people.
But I mean, not capitalism in general, but British, British wealth. National wealth, we could call it.
Yeah, the Bank of England.
Capitalism was around before slavery, or long before the British slave trade became long before the Bank of England existed. So you just got to get the chronology correct.
Yeah, of course, I do get the chronology correct. Yeah. So by the 1690s, when the Bank of England was created,
capitalism had been up and running for about 3,000 years.
Yeah, no, I wasn't saying that. that wasn't the case. But what I am saying is the Bank of England was orchestrated behind the slave triangle. On the second phase of the slave triangle, the Bank of England paid slave masters copious amounts of money for dead bodies. So we're talking about 10,000 people that died for no reason whatsoever apart from their race.
I have heard this before. I'm obviously not as informed on the subject as you are. Would it be okay for me to steer you towards the question I'm asking about the importance of apology and reparation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, by the barrel of a gun and controlling 3/4 of the world's surface, we should be subjugated when it comes to apologies. Apologies across the board. We really should. We should be terribly guilty about our imperialism and the way in which we've utilised that.
I think there's an exhibition at the Bank of England on the links with slavery, on the 300-year involvement in what you describe. 12 million African people taken from their homes and families. And it actually looks at how the wealth was created through transatlantic slavery. It's amazing the Daily Mail have managed to miss that, isn't it? It's open until February 2024.
Well, exactly.
There'll be a gnashing of teeth on Tufton Street, I think.
Oh, they certainly will. I hope they apologise, which they won't. But don't you find it ironic politically that we cherish the Bank of England?
Well, I am
orchestrated for perpetuating the slave triangle.
Yeah, except they don't. I mean, I understand. I think I understand the point that you're making, Ian, and I'm working very hard to remain patient about the fact that you're completely ignoring the conversation that I'm trying to have.
Sorry,
but no, that's all right. Swings and roundabouts. But I don't think you're adding anything to the question of how important these apologies and future reparations are to the descendants of enslaved people. I fully appreciate your well-developed antipathy towards capitalism and the bourgeoisie, but I don't know, I just feel you might have pushed people out of the queue a bit, and that's probably my fault. Anthony's in Brighton. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I'm speaking as a UK English black guy. I went to school in the 70s. We're about the same age. And I remember being taught at school that slavery was a thing that occurred in America.
Wow.
And it was only when I was about 10 or 11 that, I got this clearer picture that actually slavery occurred in lots of places, and we were also a part of it. So I remember being taught about William Wilberforce freeing slaves before I ever learned about English slavery.
So the story's backwards, because obviously I have to point out that if you're being taught about William Wilberforce, you are being taught that slavery existed in the United Kingdom, but you're being taught about it from the perspective of, aren't we great? We abolished it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, when it comes to the conversation around reparations, it's a dangerous side issue. I think what's more important is truth and reconciliation. It's just, I'm all for going.
Your phone line has gone absolutely crackers, which is mildly diverting and something that we may seek to repair, pardon the pun. But I understand. Actually, the story about the Gladstones isn't about reparations, but there were two stories in the news earlier this week that very much were. Inevitably, some bloke in the Daily Mail wrote an article about how reparations are absolutely awful and didn't really address the issue of apology. I don't feel I'm entitled to much of an opinion on that, because it would not be making reparations for anything that me or my forebears have been through. But you absolutely are, Anthony. Two Anthonys now, so just to be clear, farewell, Anthony in Brighton. Apologies that your phone line didn't stand up to the task in hand. And hello, Anthony in Croydon. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, just a couple of points on reparations. One,
and apologies, not just reparations.
Well, I suppose it's connected, but reparations is a principle that's accepted. I mean, it was one of the things around either the First World War and the Second World War, wasn't it?
Yes.
So it's an accepted principle. But the issue about reparations is who and how.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would suggest going to Jamaica and looking at the roads, looking at the hospitals, looking at the schools. I wouldn't give the money directly to the people there to manage any kind of reparation.
You're suggesting, well, I mean, is that not a bit chicken and egg? Are we not talking about countries that... Your phone line's terrible as well. I think you might be accidentally swallowing your mouthpiece, Anthony. It's sounding quite tricky at this end. But I think you're alluding to the quality of government, which is a slightly rocky road to go down. But wouldn't the quality of government be higher if we were talking about countries as wealthy as the United Kingdom has been historically?
No, I'm talking about corruption. And I mean, that exists all over. I mean, Boris misusing government, either contracts or funds, isn't just...
But again, puts us looking at the PPE deals, I'm a little bit... What would the word be? I don't know. Glass houses and throwing stones and things like that. But yeah, of course, the question of where it would go and how would be crucial. I'm more interested actually today in the emotional impact and importance of these sort of conversations coming to the fore more and more. The notion that I'm reading about how much it means to William Gladstone's descendants. I'm not reading or hearing much about how much it means to the descendants of the people that John Gladstone enslaved. And that is part of the problem. That is very much an illustration of our society and how it is constructed. It's inevitable, and I'm not even sure I'm criticising it. I'm just noting it. Michelle's in Wembley, and we will talk to her after Thomas Watts brings you the very latest.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You can tell that I'm tying myself in knots over my lack of qualifications to offer up pungent opinions on this issue, but I think that there has been a fairly successful, centuries-old mission to cloak the reality of the slave trade. The first, it was Anthony in Brighton, I think, who talked about being taught about American slavery at school. But British slavery was always taught from the perspective, go us, we abolished it. Not talked about from the perspective of a prime minister, not far before Wilberforce's time, owning 2,500 people. And I think that even families whose forebears were enslaved will have been part of that process. Go to the same schools. It's why when Akala talked about Saturday morning schools, when he writes about it in his book Natives, such an interesting and important element of that experience, but one that doesn't really exist anymore. 11:34 is the time, and I am talking about the emotional impact on descendants of enslaved people or slavers of the growing conversation about apology and atonement, and then to a lesser extent reparation, but that I suppose is the most easily accessible element of the conversation. Michelle's in Wembley. Michelle, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Hello,
yes.
Michelle.
Hi, yeah. I just wanted to comment on why is it that the government think that it's acceptable to repay the slave owners.
That was in 1833.
Yeah, but they only finished paying them up to 2015.
This is true.
So if they can do that, why aren't they doing something for the descendants of slaves? Why aren't they being compensated?
That's a rhetorical question, I think, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Because, they obviously should be.
Right, so why aren't they? Why is it that up to 2015, they've just finished paying that, and they've...
just to be clear, the British government finished paying the loan it took out to make the reparations payments in 1833. I wouldn't want anyone to go away thinking that, the descendants of slavers were still getting checks off the government when David Cameron was Prime Minister.
Okay, but my point is...
No, I do. I understand your point. I'm just making it clear for people who don't that's not what happened. So, it's not quite comparing apples with apples, because the loan was taken out in 1833 when nobody contemplated giving compensation to actual slaves, whereas by the time the loan was paid off, the idea of giving compensation to owners and not to slaves seems completely backwards, doesn't it?
Yeah, so... for me, I just think that it's unacceptable, and that they should be doing more for not only the slave descendants, but also for the countries where they had... Sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah, but then I stopped because I realised I was interrupting you in full flow.
Okay. Yeah, I think that they should be compensating the descendants of slaves, and also doing something for the countries where they had slaves.
I get that. And when I say why, I'm not asking it from an aggressive perspective. Because I see the natural justice argument. How can you possibly give money to the owners and not to the owned? But in context of your feelings in 2023, why would the reparation element be important? What would it change?
Because I think that it's affected the lives of the descendants.
Yes.
And I think it's impacting the young people even up to today. You see all these, and you might say it's a different argument, but I just think that, there's not things in place for young people, and that, they're out there in the streets causing havoc because they've not had the advantages.
And the psychological history as well, I think, is something that needs to be better explored and better understood for the reasons that you allude to. And that notion of equality. Can you ever feel truly equal in a country where your great-great-great-great-grandfather was owned by somebody else's? And you both walk in the same streets today? I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question, and it's why I keep stressing that I'm not really qualified to provide answers. Tony picks up on this point, describing himself as a Londoner in Lancashire. This discussion also links into why the history curriculum in this country has been so upside down and hidden. Imagine black students of West Indian origin realising that their parents were paying taxes to descendants of families who owned our ancestors. It's truly mind-blowing. And yet, of course, when Black History Month is announced, it comes around every year, you just need to dip half a toe into Twitter to find a bunch of bozos complaining. It is incredible. Maybe that's part of the answer there. That is exactly what they're scared of, Tony. The truth. Afua is in Cheshire. Afua, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'd like to concur with your last caller and some of the sentiments that you've just expressed as well. It is a very, very complex issue. On the one hand, we've got the deniers who say it's 400 years ago, move on. There's nothing to complain about. Why has every other oppressed group manage to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get on with it. But what's not being examined is the deep-rooted trauma collectively in people of African descent, and the displacement that took place, the divide that is still there to this day between, say, for instance, people from Caribbean heritage and people directly from Africa. All of those divides were driven and rooted in by the transatlantic slave trade. If you imagine you have an individual victim, for instance, who, let's say that individual has been raped, if I can use that word on radio.
Of course you can,
Let's say, for instance, that has happened. You then uproot that individual and put them next door to their rapist and expect them to thrive, to psychologically overcome the trauma and to become functional members of society. It's impossible. So what you've got is slavery, neocolonialism, and the overspill of ghettos, if you like, in the West. Because one of the things that I've been examining recently, James, as well, if the issues that we have in the UK, the US, and places like that within black communities are specific to black communities, why do we not see them replicated in Africa, for instance, and other parts of the Caribbean? Do you see what I mean?
Of course I do, and I see the converse as well, which is the kind of problems that you're alluding to, commonplace among the white working class in Glasgow.
Absolutely.
So it's clearly not. Well, you know that racists want to impute criminality to DNA. That's how they justify stop and search. It's how they. It's how they stay employed in some cases. But talk to me about the difference that these conversations make. So let's actually specifically on the Gladstone family. Does that make any difference to you?
What, the fact that the Gladstone family have decided to reach out?
Yeah, to acknowledge and atone and apologise.
I think it does make a difference. I mean, obviously, if you're a victim of any kind of crime and the perpetrator reaches out and apologises and shows some sort of remorse, it's going to have an impact, isn't it?
I hope
but
so.
They're not direct perpetrators.
Well, no, that's the point I was about to make, and I think it's a really important point because, I can see on a systemic social level the importance of apologising for what our forebears have done, but I wouldn't hold you responsible for your great grandmother being a drink driver, for example.
Well, that's the point I was going to go on to make, is that, individual families making apologies, that's all fair and well, and it's great on one level, but this needs to happen at a governmental level. It needs to happen globally. It needs to be taken up by the United Nations, actually. That's what should be happening, and there does need to be some sort of effort towards reparation for those countries. Do we give those reparations to
why reparations
African
for those
nations?
countries? Well, yeah, but also why reparations for those countries? Because Anthony and Croydon picked up on this as well, where I was thinking, perhaps lazily, more about some form of reparation for the actual individual descendants. But that would be almost impossible to police, wouldn't it? The bureaucracy of it.
That's the point, isn't it? We're talking about millions upon millions of people. I think that if there were individual reparations, it would either be a sum that was an insult or sums of money that would bankrupt the West.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's feasible. I think it does need to be managed. It does need to be managed through countries in Africa or West Africa or wherever.
Yeah, but the problem,
and more importantly, the Caribbean and South America, where those slaves were taken and where we ended up. So the UK, the US, those communities, but it has to be very, very carefully policed. What we have as a result of neocolonialism is corrupt governments that are allowed to run with impunity across whatever region. There's no checks and balances, so that's not a good idea. The other problem you've got is the notion of societal equality. So what you are moving towards is an acknowledgement of epic, ingrained, centuries-old inequality. But this is currently a country where even the head of the Metropolitan Police won't use the phrase institutional racism because he's worried it might upset his own officers. So the struggle is real, isn't it? Getting that notion across. You talk about white privilege, and people who have got a fairly rubbish life say, well, I've got not got any privilege. What are you talking about, white privilege? And either they are willfully not understanding or they genuinely don't understand. It's not a denial of their problems or prejudices they've faced. It's just an acknowledgement that there is one prejudice they don't face. And the struggle you have even getting words into the public vocabulary like that. Never mind
the financial element that you're alluding to. But I mean, that's it, isn't it? The bigger the mountain, the more important it is that you start climbing. Thank you, Af. Thank you. No, sorry, come back by all means.
No, I was going to say, that what we deal with on a sort of microcosm of the bigger problem. Yeah, that's what we deal with every day. People that are in denial, people that say you have a chip on your shoulder.
Yeah, of course.
If you make those points, but if the governments that were...
There it is. Dawn Butler's new book's brilliant on a lot of this, actually. If Afua can still hear me, I don't know what happened then, but I think our battery ran out, didn't it? It sounded like the battery had gone. Dawn Butler's new book, I think Dawn's on Full Disclosure this week or next week. I think it's this week. Her new book is superb on a lot of these issues and the modern implications, the modern repercussions of what Afua was just talking about so powerfully. The time now is 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:48 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation is remarkable. And what's most remarkable about it is that we're only having it now. And that is actually the point of the conversation, isn't it? Gladstone family apologising for their forebears' role in the slave trade. The father of the Victorian Prime Minister, William Gladstone, owned and traded in 2,500 human lives. What impact do these apologies have in 2023 upon the descendants of the enslaved, and what impact do the stories have on the descendants of slavers? Mike's in Brighton. Mike, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Well, I think I discovered something during lockdown. My mother did our family tree.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the names that came out of that was a guy called James Glassford.
Right.
Her maiden name is Glassford. And he was a tobacco lord in the 1700s.
God.
He owned tobacco plantations in Virginia. And he's got streets named after him in Glasgow. He's got a whole wing of the People's Palace in Glasgow named after him, the museum there. And he features in quite a famous portrait, which has the first portrayal of a black person in English portraiture. All of which my mum was quite proud of, until I started digging into John Glassford and realising that he was a slave trader. He was one of the richest slave traders in the empire. He held out when the British government was offering reparations to the slave traders. He held out, kept his plantations, and then lost them all during the Civil War because he was essentially on the wrong side morally in the Civil War. And he died a pauper, which then makes you wonder, well, what do you do as a relative of a slave trader who hasn't benefited in any way? I don't live in a country mansion in Brighton.
No, I don't know that the conversation is about you.
You don't think so?
I don't know. I mean, it certainly wasn't in my mind. I was thinking, that's why I mentioned the Earl of Harewood and the actor David Harewood. I was thinking about 21st century scenarios that would simply not exist were it not for the 19th, 18th, 17th century context. So
sure. Glasgow's recently apologised for continuing to name a street after one of my relatives, which.
Well, they apologise for continuing to do it.
The progressive side of politics, who obviously find slavery abhorrent. I find it very difficult to sort of come to terms with it. I haven't really fully thought the process through.
So have they kept the name in place, or they?
Yeah, it's Glassford Street.
So they apologised for keeping it.
They've apologised for having a number of names. Glasgow benefited enormously from the slave trade and tobacco industry. I think it's always been portrayed. The history, my mum's family, it's always been portrayed as we were the poor side of a rich family, but it turned out it actually wasn't.
It's a fascinating story. It really is. I think with the apologies, street names, and again, I'm not sure either of us really sort of qualified to have particularly strong opinions on this. I see a street name as less offensive than a statue. I think when the statue in Bristol was...
there were statues. There are a number of buildings named after him. There's a museum.
Well, exactly. So what I don't want to do is live in a country where a dad has to explain to his son why somebody who enslaved their ancestors, or his daughter or a mum has to explain to someone who enslaved their ancestors is still fated in the 21st century. I think that the historical relativism argument falls apart. You say, well, no, of course, they were fated in the 18th and 19th century, but we don't need to be fating them now. The world has changed in the way that, even something as stupid as that Spanish fella kissing the football player after the World Cup final, hearing other callers on LBC with other presenters just simply saying the world has changed. You can't do that anymore. Seems to me perfectly straightforward to say the world has changed. We don't fate slavers anymore, so the statues are all coming down. Pat's in Vauxhall. Pat, what would you like to say?
A great deal, actually. I grew up in the Caribbean, and I was part of the process of discovering what the effects of slavery were. And I think were asking about the emotional effects of this.
Yes, the emotional impact.
Well, I can also confess that I adapted the story of the Gladstone rebellion for radio, and it actually took me 3 weeks to recover because it was so brutal and it was so awful. And one of the things that I think people need to understand is that slavery was not just the transporting of people.
I'm going to try and get your phone line better, Pat, because I want to listen to every word that you've got to say. And at the moment, I'm missing about 1 in 3. So we will come back to you imminently, I promise, all being well. 11:54 is the time. I don't know what's wrong with the phones today, but it's been a particularly tricky hour. Kelvin's in Stratford. Kelvin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good morning. Hi. What I would like to contribute is I was born in the Caribbean, right? And my grandfather had a farm, and we used to sell our produce directly to the British, right? The produce that we used to sell and what we used to get for it was absolutely pittance.
Yes.
And right. So I understand the whole thing about reparation in the sense of non-financial directly to the descendants of the formerly enslaved. Because I think if you look at it from a financial point of view, there's not, even the whole world together could not pay.
There's no price.
Right? Because there just isn't.
Sure.
Right? But the way to fix it or to make the reparation is to help the countries that was affected or still been affected by slavery to build their infrastructure, such as good hospitals, good educational facilities, schools, roads to the farms that used to supply the British with the raw materials and all the foods and stuff like that. This is a better way. On
the reparation side of things, I think that makes sense. I understand it. It doesn't make much difference to the lives of the people that Afua was describing so powerfully, does it? The people who are living here with the consequences, with the post-slavery consequences on the equality issue or on the. I think we've lost another phone line then. It's absolutely bonkers today. I do apologise. But the point that I was making was that it's not either or. You do that on the context of the financial, but in the context of the truth and reconciliation or that you need that as well, I think. Oh, Kelvin's back, don't you?
Yeah, you need that. That is emotional and psychological effect, right?
What's more important? I mean, literally, if I put you in charge, and I said, right, you can wave a magic wand and either the British government and hopefully other European governments deliver huge amounts of financial aid to the territories most affected by slavery, or we turn the curriculum in this country and the political landscape in this country upside down, and nobody will ever again be able to underestimate or ignore the full impact that the slave trade has on black British citizens today. What would you do? Which one would you choose?
I would choose building the infrastructure of the countries that's directly affected, because the reason I would choose that is because the whole point of migration, and we can see what's happening in the Mediterranean, those things would stop. Because people wouldn't necessarily have jobs.
Yeah, okay. So you would. I mean, that one of the great purposes of foreign aid, in the context of a refugee crisis, is to make places from which people are fleeing, nicer, less likely to be fled from. Kelvin, thank you. But let's go back to Pat in Vauxhall. Pat, I think we've improved the quality of your phone line. Where were we?
I was just talking about some of the emotional effects of slavery that are not being discussed. I mean, one of the most effective things, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Barbados Code, but actually what they did was learn how to destroy the family so that men were used for breeding, as were women. And it was a highly effective capitalist system because you had almost free labor and you could create new labor as you wanted it. And one of the major problems with that is you had to destroy the identity of the people that you were working with. And we still live with that today. I grew up in a society in Jamaica where literally you were told if you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, stick around. If you're black, stand back.
Gosh.
And that was within a black-dominated society.
Yes.
So I think the emotional and social scars go very, very deep. And I think you also need to be really cognizant of the fact that Britain has profited hugely from the islands and has also done an awful lot to destroy. And one of the reasons that Britain moved out of it was the level of rebellion that actually went on. The Gladstone, the revolt in Ghana was led by Jack Gladstone, and his own father was hung on a gibbet and allowed to rot in order to fight the other slaves. So that the history of rebellion and the fact that slaves knew about other rebellions in the Caribbean was one of the reasons that Europe got out of the Caribbean. It was also the reason that beet sugar was so welcome, because all of a sudden they didn't need cane sugar anymore. So there are huge economic and social reasons for what happened, but we paid a price in terms of our self-image, our self-esteem, but of course also our wealth. And the fact that we are tiny islands, we're very vulnerable, and unless we are protected in some way, which is what China is doing now, we are at the mercy of larger economies.
Blimey, we're supposed to be moving towards the end of the hour, Pat, and you've just opened up a whole host of new avenues of inquiry and conversation. Can I ask you on a personal level how you feel when stories like the one about the Gladstone family are made public this week?
My most cynical response is, isn't it interesting that they've gone to Ghana, which has just found oil wealth and is not going to need their money, and they haven't gone to Jamaica, which is suffering in all sorts of other ways and would need the money. That's my cynical response. But I also think it's tremendously important that the people of England understand what slavery entails, not because they need to feel guilty, but because they need a true understanding of their history. And once they've got that, then what happens is I think you begin to have more equality and more equality of opportunity.
Well, that leads us into territory that we explore often on this programme from all manner of perspectives. And there, of course, are plenty of people who don't want more equality, aren't there?
Of course, because in order to be very rich, you need an awful lot of poor people working very hard. And you can tell from what I'm saying what my politics are. So, that's.
I think I can, Pat, and I hope you can tell from mine as well that I'm pretty much of a piece with the way you look at things. And that of course, is something we talk about from every angle. The idea of just presuming that people want more equality is so naive. Pat certainly wasn't doing that, but I spent a significant part of my life under that spell. Pat, thank you so much. It is 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12 is the time, and I think we'll do something a bit Brexity now. I've heard a lot about this, and we've covered it. I don't know whether I will need to expand it from musicians to the broader workforce. I kind of hope not, to be honest with you, because I think it's slightly underestimated. The two sort of very famous musicians one thinks of in this context, Elton John leading the line, despite the fact that he can obviously afford to navigate all of the problems created by Boris Johnson and David Frost and the rest of them. And on the other hand, the bloke out of The Who, Roger Daltrey, making incredibly boneheaded comments on television in the run-up to the referendum vote, just genuinely not understanding what was likely to happen in the event of us leaving the single market. And of course, it's really straightforward. Kieran, the van driver, explained it to us on 100 occasions. If you were, for example, taking a truck, well, I'm going to give you my understanding of what happens, and then obviously we'll take calls from people who do actually know what they're talking about. But you're taking a truck with 50 guitars in it on tour in Europe. You're going to need documentation for each guitar, and that documentation could, I think, conceivably be checked at various borders. So it seems to me that the music industry, the performing music industry, and this would involve everything from opera through to punk rock, as I believe the kids call it, has been completely kebabbed by Brexit. And because we live in a country where the media is still pretending it was a good idea. This is not a phone-in about whether or not Brexit was a good idea, all right? That ship has sailed. It's a phone-in about the specific experiences of a specific sector that will only really, these days, you'll only hear about it in The Guardian. And that is because the rest of occasionally the online algorithms must be changing a bit, because the Express website now sometimes starts reporting reality, but they do it in very apocalyptic headlines. So you will now on the Express website get stories that people are obviously clicking on a lot, and that will say things like, my business has gone bust because of Brexit, or I thought, the I newspaper does it as well, actually, I apologise, not because of algorithms, but they'll get a story from, I voted for Brexit because I thought it would make it easier for me to live in my house in Italy, and now I have to, now I can only stay there for 60 days in every 100 or whatever it is. So the algorithms are clearly changing, but the editorial decisions aren't. Do I need to explain the difference? Let me try anyway. So with a lot of online stuff, you're looking at numbers. It's almost entirely a numbers game. You are looking at what works and trying to emulate it. So the viral clips or the things, the news stories that people are interested in, the ones that they're most likely to click on. It's that straightforward. You probably didn't need me to explain that. But editorial decisions, particularly newspapers that are very top-heavy, where editors or editorial staff still carry enormous weight, editorial decisions are very different. The Daily Mail is never going to run a story about the appalling consequences of Brexit, whether it is on the farming industry, the fishing industry, or in this case, the music industry. It just isn't going to happen. You might get it online, where the algorithm is God, but you will not get it in print. Not now. There was a brief window when they had a different editor, when you might have done. That was when they actually reported accurately and fairly on the abomination of trying to save Owen Patterson's career after he'd been found to behave egregiously. But you will never get it in those sort of newspapers. You probably wouldn't get it in the Telegraph. You might get it in the Times a little bit. But in terms of it becoming a major national talking point, it ain't ever going to happen. And a lot of the time, you're only going to see it in the I newspaper, The Guardian, or on Sundays, The Observer. So I want to talk about what Brexit has done to touring musicians. Mezzo-soprano, a very famous mezzo-soprano, Jennifer Johnston, said that it is quietly killing our world-class music sector. Don't bother applying for a place in Idiot's Corner by saying, oh, woe is me, the opera is suffering, because we both know already that you're an idiot, so there's no point in you texting me to prove it. You've got a world-class mezzo-soprano describing Brexit as quietly killing our world-class music sector. She says you cannot overstate the impact. The problem with the denial that we see is that it prevents the government from doing things to help. The problem with that Daily Express front page today, where Kemi Badenoch gets to pretend that signing a trade deal with India, if we ever do sign it, is somehow wonderful proof that Brexit was a great idea, when we're there essentially begging India for patronage and custom. The fact that the government still has to keep pretending that everything's going brilliantly prevents politics and politicians from trying to fix problems, because this was a decision taken during negotiation. That's the most mad thing about the music angle, is that they were happy because it would be of mutual benefit. They were happy for British bands to continue to enjoy reciprocal touring arrangements with European bands. Do you know what? We probably come at that from a position of strength. Well, we obviously do, don't we? Much, much more likely to go and see a British band playing in Paris or Rome than you are to see a French or Italian band playing in Britain. It is one of the few areas where we are truly world leading. So that must be why David Frost and Boris Johnson decided to, well, I don't know, that doesn't make sense either. So because we have such a rich tradition and such a fantastic music business, they were keen for our bands to be able to continue to tour. And not just our bands, but our operas and our classical music orchestras, all of that. And Boris Johnson and David Frost turned around and said no. Do you want to have a crack at explaining that before we get into what the actual impacts are? Why would they turn around and say no? 0345 6060 973. Because what has actually happened is that we have made it so hard to travel through Europe, to tour Europe, that people have simply stopped. Now, it's not going to affect the massive acts, for want of a better word. Elton John can afford to do it. Coldplay can afford to do it. They might have to ever so slightly rejig their schedule to accommodate how long they can stay in certain territories, but they can do it. It's a lot harder. I've got a mate involved, actually, as a tour manager with one of the biggest bands in the world, but I'm not allowed to tell you which one. And his life has been rendered. He says it's much easier to go to Brazil now than it is to go to Europe. And he can't believe it because it's entirely self-imposed. And the fury they reserve for that decision not to accept an offer to have reciprocal touring rights is I mean, it's spectacular to behold. But it means that bands are simply not moving. So they've undertaken a survey, and you have to exclude for the purposes of this survey. This is what they said, the ISM, the Independent Society of Musicians. They said categorically and clearly, you cannot include experiences that were caused by the pandemic, right? For the avoidance of doubt, don't tell me about a gig that got cancelled because of the pandemic. This has to be as a consequence entirely of Brexit. And it looked at the period from the 1st of January 2021 until April 2023. It went right across the sector. So all forms of music, I'm going to say on a few occasions, from opera to punk rock, because I think that covers most of the gamut. And they asked, what's happened? What effect have you had? 4 out of 10 of those taking part said they had had work cancelled. 4 out of 10 said that they had been forced to turn down work, and a quarter of the music industry workers who had previously gigged, I believe that's the right verb, is it? They had previously gigged in Europe, haven't done a single gig since. So, 3 questions. Question number 1, what are the problems that we have inflicted on ourselves? Precisely and specific. What are the problems? Because I can use words like visas or carnets, but I want them explained in easily comprehensible language. What are these problems that Boris Johnson and David Frost have deliberately and consciously inflicted on one of the very, very, very few sectors in which we can realistically claim to be world-beating? That's question number 1. Question number 2, consequences, both personal. Have you had to break the band up? Have you had to move house? Have you had to give up opera? Have you had to get a Saturday job? I don't know. But so consequences for you, but also consequences culturally. What's this going to mean culturally? Does it mean that our orchestras will suffer because they no longer play Berlin as often as they do? That both the personal and the group dynamic as well, the consequences, the effect. 0345 6060 973. And then finally, this may be too soon. I don't know when or whether we're going to be ready for these conversations. Why would Johnson and Frost have turned down the opportunity to leave things exactly as they were for touring musicians? I genuinely don't know. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So I like those questions. Number 1 is the detail of it. What have we actually done to ourselves? Number 2 is the impact of it. How has it actually affected you or your band or your orchestra or your troupe of Morris dancers? And number 3 is, why did they do this? Did they not realise what they were doing? Or can you think of an ideological rationale for it? Or were they expecting... I mean, it's just utterly, utterly bonkers. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973. Well, no, hang on. Well, 3. I should finish that. So, but also associated industries as well. Max says makeup artists, anybody affected by this touring difficulty, by the self-inflicted sanctions on our entertainment industry.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:17 is the time. Stephen has texted to say, are we going to hear from your mate Matt from the 1976? Mate, it's the 1975. I hope that was a typo and not a very fatal case of old man-itis. I don't know. It's a while since Matty Healy rang in. He's a very, very busy man. And also the 1975 are an act of sufficient stature to be able to navigate the new rules that we've imposed on ourselves. And of course, there might be bands there now that would one day be as big as the 1975, but the fact that building up a fan base in Europe has been rendered much, much harder than it used to be will, in a music industry where live performances and touring are more important than they were when we were kids because of streaming, you could be actually crippling the chances. You could be reducing the chances of the next 1975 having the ability to build the base that they need to become a world-beating band. Russ is in Weybridge. Russ, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, James, good to speak to you. Hope you're doing well. This is a subject that I'm super passionate about. I could talk about it for days, but I'll make it super quick. I'm a professional musician and singer. I've been doing it for years. Before Brexit, my band could just jump in a van, head over to France, perform at a wedding and head back. Now, we did one last August. We've got to apply for a carnet, which costs the best part of 500 quid for all of our equipment. Then we've got to go and we've got to get customs check before we get on the ferry, customs check after we get off the ferry. Then we can go and do the gig. Then when we come back, we've got to get a customs check again before we get on the ferry. And then we've got to get a customs check again when we get back in the UK, just because we're going over the border with equipment.
Are you? I mean, on the other hand, I don't know whether or not this is going to address all of your issues or just most of them. Obviously, when Kemi Badenoch signs a new trade deal with India, everything's going to be brilliant for you.
Yeah, it's perfect because we can just pop over to India to do a gig.
But I don't even think you'll be able to do that, mate. I think that, but I mean, so I don't want to. I mean, you give me as much detail as you want to give me. How big a chunk out of the average fee for one night would £500 take?
It's not so much us because we'll pass that on to the client, but then that adds up the cost. Yes. And then so now we can't really take our equipment abroad.
No.
So what I'm seeing is there are companies now that are setting themselves up over in Europe that are hiring out the equipment. So essentially, we have to charge the client twice to hire in all of the backline, the guitar amps, the drums, the keyboard, everything like that, and then our fee for our time. Now, I'm in a fortunate position.
I'll get a local band, thanks.
Or get a local band, which again has an add-on effect, because if me and my band and other bands aren't now able to go over to France, there's more bands in the UK, which then drives the price down for bands performing in the UK.
Because you're all circling the same carcass.
Because we're all in the same country now. I mean, if you're just going abroad with one instrument, you can get on a plane and it's not actually a problem.
It's still harder than it was, but it's not as hard as it is for you. So it's not. Nothing has been made easier for anybody.
It's not been made easier, and it's just you asked the question, why have they done it? I have absolutely no idea. It's the most ridiculous thing ever. And if the EU offered us the opportunity, but
they did. I'm 99.9% sure, and I never get anything wrong about Brexit.
I'm confident they did as well. And I don't know what, of all the things, if people are so passionate about immigration, they don't want foreigners coming. I don't agree with that at all. Brexit was the most ridiculous thing. But professional musicians, artists, cameramen, photographers, it's all in the same ballpark.
Of course it is. Because it could be a film set that you're going to, couldn't it?
Exactly.
Not a concert hall.
I know like wedding and event photographers that they have to deal with the same things. If they want to take like a full-on lighting rig, they can't, because they can't just carry it on a plane.
Unbelievable. No one's going to be... Well, Phil's had a go at answering it, actually. He says Johnson and Frost turned down the reciprocal deal because they're as thick as Pavarotti's floorboards.
I completely
I haven't
agree.
heard that before. Is that a well-known figure of speech? I quite like it. It's a bit fattest, I suppose.
Yeah, it is a little bit, but I completely agree.
Thank you, Russ, and good night. Do you want to mention the band for anyone looking for a band in this country or not? It's your choice.
There's two bands. There's the DeLoreans, and there's another band called Fiddling About as well, which I front.
All right. Cheers, Russ. Take care, mate. I like the DeLoreans. What do the DeLoreans play? 80s stuff?
No, it's like we take you back and forward in time. So we'll do like a 60s song, then we'll do like a 90s song, then we'll do an 80s, and then we'll do like a 2000s. So we take on a journey.
I love that. That's a great idea. Nice one. Russ, take care, mate. Stay safe. It is 23 minutes after 12. Just crack on with this, actually. I'm not going to need to extend it to any other industries, but if you're feeling a bit left out, feel free to join in. Ollie's in Clapham. Ollie, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'm part of an indie rock band, and we're doing pretty well. We've done a lot of cool things, but to tour in Europe, if we're going to be very specific about that, is nigh on impossible for anyone. You know, I come from a fairly well-off background, but it is still not affordable for me. I can't imagine. There's no way I can see anyone from any other kind of background, unless they are uber rich, to be able to do that. And the thing is,
even if you're uber rich, you're not supposed to be running at a loss, are you? However wealthy your parents are.
Yeah, exactly, not at all. And the thing is, it's not realistic for every band to become the 1975. Yeah, but some people do want to make a living out of it.
Of course.
And in the UK. No disrespect to I think we've had a real hit in our with regards to people paying out to other bands. So it's difficult for other people to pay bands, but we don't get paid very well playing in the UK. In Europe, they pay really, really well. The French and the Germans, they love indie music, and they will fork out a few £100 for a gig. And you do not get that in the UK.
So
it doesn't happen.
What have you done then? Have you been you kind of run at a bit of a loss when you've played Europe in the hope of building up a following?
No, so the one time that we got to do.
How long has the band been together, Ollie?
We're about 4 years now.
Okay.
We're doing pretty well.
Good. What are they called? Can I ask what they're called, or do you not want to get publicity on an old man's radio show?
No, it's all right. We are the Great Leslie.
The Great...
and the Great Leslie.
What a great name.
Yeah, it's after a Tony Curtis character in an old film.
My 17-year-old will be texting me shortly going, "Oh my God, I can't believe you've got the Great Leslie on the show." But playing Europe is close to impossible, is what you're telling us.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, I think it must have been a year and a half ago, we got to go to France by the grace of a family friend of mine, who they love our music, and it was their birthday, and they said, "We'll pay for your carnets, we'll pay for the visas, we'll pay for all of this. Just come over and play for us." And then we got to play a few other gigs.
Right, off the back of that, because they'd broken the back of it for you.
Exactly.
Oh man, that's unfair. That's so unfair, isn't it? Because that also, I don't want to be really... Go on.
James, sorry to interrupt. It is unfair, and this government is their care for the arts and for music specifically is absolutely abhorrent. The BBC introducing platforms are essentially in dissolution now.
Yes.
We've been supported by BBC Essex through the last year with every single song we've released, and the DJ there who supported us now has to hang up his hat essentially for BBC Essex
because of the cuts across there.
Because of the cuts, it's absolutely disgusting, and young artists and young bands will not get the opportunities that they are afforded now, least of all 10 years ago. It is unbelievable.
Mate, you're on the money. So 20 years down the line, we're all going to be sitting here wondering, why are we no longer like the biggest players in town when it comes to touring musicians and music and the rest of it? I think, have you played the States yet? Have you been to America yet?
God, I wish.
Well, I think it might be easier.
Well, it may be easier, but as far as I know, so I have a few friends who are in very big bands, and they tell me how much more difficult it is to actually get paid in America, even more so than in Britain.
Fair enough.
So even though we could go over, I don't know if we'd make any money to justify that trip.
Well, I will be listening to My Left Eye after the show today, Ollie.
Oh, good lad. And listen to Burn Me, Drown Me. That's about climate change. The whole new EP that we're releasing is about 21st century problems, which is the title of the EP.
I like it. I shall report back tomorrow. Ollie, take care. 27 after 12 is the time. It's not right, is it? I mean, the idea of... Oh, hang on, Ollie, come back a minute. I'm asking everybody this, but I don't imagine you've got a particularly good... Do you understand why Boris Johnson and David Frost did this to you?
Kick in the head? I don't know.
Kicked in the head by a horse. I don't know. Julian is in Bornholm, which I've almost certainly pronounced incorrectly, in Denmark. Julian, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Yeah, as your previous caller said, it's not just the hassle of carting equipment around Europe. I've lived in Denmark for 30 years. I was a touring musician for 20 years of that, and for me it was just a guitar and a microphone. The problem was that post-Brexit, before Brexit, I was working in Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Germany.
Right.
And Denmark, of course.
Yes.
But because of Brexit, I now have permanent resident status here in Denmark.
Yes.
But I'm only allowed to work in Denmark.
Were you playing last night, Julian?
No, sadly I had to pack it in
because you're sounding a bit croaky. Is that why you've knocked it on the head?
Sadly, I've lost my voice permanently.
Oh, mate, well, that's a curse, isn't it, for doing what you do? So, I mean, you've been attacked from all angles, but you'd need to become a Danish citizen in order to travel freely from...
Yes, and I'm presently waiting for Danish citizenship, which takes about 2.5 years.
It's incredible, right?
2.5 years. The irony is... Go on. The irony is, James, is I can see Sweden from where I live on a clear day.
Oh, that's nice.
Yes, I can't play there.
But you can't play there.
It's
absolutely baffling. I think that point I made at the outset about the media still being, or most media still being caught up in both denial and delusion, explains why these sort of stories, because we've just had both. I won't ask your vintage, Julian, but you're nearer the end of the other end of the line compared to Ollie on before with his band that's making great. I'm just looking at some of their reviews. I mean, that is a band that is going places, but it's not going to Europe. It's insane.
I was just on the Irish pub circuit, you know.
Sure.
But
it's a living. It's a nice living. It's a nice living. It's a nice livelihood, and it's been complete. I need to ask you. I asked the others. Any thoughts on why Johnson and Frost might have done this?
Well, again, I think it must have been the same horse that kicked him in the head.
It's 12:30. Amelia Cox is here now with your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is, of course, 12:33, and we're talking about what Brexit has done to the music industry. And to be honest with you, even James O'Brexit is staggered by the sheer scale of the problems that we're hearing and the sheer stretch. I like this as well from Matt. Shout out to Roger Daltrey from The Who and Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden, who openly voted for and supported Brexit, kicking the ladder out from under younger bands just starting out, boycott the dinosaurs and get on Bandcamp to support small and upcoming artists. They're more interesting anyway. I didn't know Bruce Dickinson had gone down that road. I remember seeing footage of Daltrey spouting all sorts of bills, but he used to knock about with the fella that owned the Daily Express, so God knows what sort of nonsense he's swallowed over the years. Justin's in Scunthorpe. Justin, what made you pick up the phone?
Now then, I'm quite surprised to go through that. I'm just adding just a little slightly different perspective here because obviously we're concerned about the young groups that can't get a foothold. But there's a massive section of bands that have been working really hard for a really long time that are basically, flummoxed. The most of the fan bases in Europe and they're doing well, and now, literally overnight, it seems like it's been taken away from them.
Because the livelihood is dependent on the touring. It's that's the bread and butter, isn't it? And more so now than ever. So if you've suddenly shut down 50%, 60% of your international touring avenues, you've shut down 50 to 60% of your livelihood.
Well, put it this way. A few years ago, let's say 10 years ago, I was able to live on it.
Yeah.
But with the advent of streaming and Spotify and everything else, it got a bit tougher. But what I didn't need is the sort of the nail put in the coffin where you can't even, because, my publishing revenue's obviously not as good as it could be because of the streaming.
Sure.
So I am dependent on the live work. But now, it's like...
And the live work is dwindling, is it?
Well, it's sometimes as a musician, it feels like every turn you make, there's a blockade put in your way.
Yeah.
So now I'm in my 50s. I've been, playing gigs. I've come up through, doing squad gigs and crusty punk gigs and stuff. I've paid my dues.
Yeah.
My way up into doing guitars and tour buses and being involved a lot more, and and so 10 years ago I could have lived off it.
I know.
Well, I was virtually.
And now then I had it's gone backwards.
Well, I had to supplement it with sort of teching work. So I started guitar teching and drum teching for other bands.
Right.
But all those bands and all my friends and my management, the record companies, they're all based in Europe. So it just feels like overnight, not just my band work, which I'm sort of dependent on, It's my tech work as well. So everything has been taken away, and I'm in my 50s now. I live in an area that there's not really any scene. There's not really any job opportunities for somebody like me with my skill set, because music's been my life.
Mate,
it has my whole life. So, I mean, what am I supposed to do now? Because, I mean, I'm looking at another tour, trying to book another tour for December.
Yeah.
And it just, I mean, we're looking at the figures and we're 10 grand down. We're 10 grand in the red before we even start.
And would you previously have hopped across the channel? Would you have done that previously?
Yeah, because, I mean, you have your big one-off, like you travel.
I'm losing the phone line, Justin. It's been a right day for that. It really. What's the name of?
It might be me.
What is the name of the? Are you in a band or are you a solo act?
No, I've got a band. I've been in many other bands before, so it's.
Well, if people want to come and see you play, really... you don't have to give. Is it not suitable? Are you in one of those bands with a very rude name?
No, it's. I mean, I'll tell you if you like, but it's not really about my band. It's about the situation.
Oh, mate, I know that. I know. Oh, no, I'm just trying.
I'm not trying to sort of get on the radio to big my own band up.
I know you're not. If I thought you were,
if I thought you, such a big problem.
If I thought you were doing that, I wouldn't be asking. I'd have binned you off immediately. You're clearly speaking also from that last text I read out, the perspective of people younger than you. They've had people like Daltrey have kicked the ladder out from under them. It's incredible, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I just don't think. I mean, the thing is, it's the double-barreled assault. I mean, obviously. Yeah. The ruling class and the people who got in power at the minute, they're not bothered about arts and culture. We know that.
No, they're really not, are they? You're right.
No, but the thing is that people are led by, obviously led by donkeys, but, people are kind of led by that. They give the example.
And now filters down.
As a whole. Yeah, it
Philistines.
People don't regard musicians or artists or of any kind as a legit career, Well, and that's the way. I mean, I've never felt so marginalised now.
I can tell. I can hear it in your voice. Well, I think I can. I've never heard you speak before, so maybe you've sounded like this always. But there's a glumness, isn't there? There, a sense of powerlessness. When is your next gig?
Well, we've got one in Poland next month. We've been doing some fly-outs this year.
Right.
But again, we're just losing money hand over fist to just go and play and be a band, And then obviously, like I said, we've got this thing supposed to be booked for December, and I've just been given the figures by management, and like I said, I've somehow got to find 10 grand. I mean, there's like flights, carnets, I mean, there's the tax thing as well. Sorry, I'm going on a bit, but I mean, we they're a lot more strict on tax. We used to be able to get around if you're so many people in a touring party.
Yeah,
you can get exempt for sort of tax, paying your tax in Germany.
Oh, man, and they've done this all.
For instance.
Any idea why they did it? I've asked everybody. I'm getting a fairly unanimous response. Any idea what Johnson and Frost were playing at when they turned down an opportunity to leave things as they were, as long as it was reciprocal, which would have been massively in our favour, I think.
Well, yeah, and whatever it was, they weren't thinking about any kind of arts or culture or musician or music exports or anything like that, because they're so far removed from it. I don't think it even came up on their radar. I mean,
incredible.
Artists have been bottom of the barrel for a long time, but I mean, this lot, I think they're just. I don't even know if it's even conscious. I think they're just. For whatever reasons they've got, the result is that they're finishing off a really amazing creative industry.
That is very much the. I wasn't expecting the conversation to go quite as far or as fast. Not just with you, but with everybody from all levels of the industry. It's quite incredible. But before you go, I do want to know the name of your band.
Okay, it's Crippled Black Phoenix.
There we go. Thank you. 12:40 is the time. I've got all their CDs. Susan's in Croydon. Susan, what would you like to say?
Well, two things. First, I don't understand why people don't get why Boris did this, because I think it's basically their core base are so stupid that they wouldn't understand
you can't
the
say
difference.
That. That's my job.
Well, they wouldn't understand the difference between touring freedom of movement and regular freedom of movement. Therefore, they had to ban everything. So it was very clear that they were tough on movement. So that's my answer, and I'm 99.9% sure that's why they did it.
But that's the base. Frost must have known when they said, why don't we have reciprocal arrangements for touring musicians? He must have known what was on offer. Why did he say no?
Well, because if they did, then there would be Europeans coming over here under freedom of movement, and the rabid Brexiters would be like, oh no, there's freedom of movement.
We don't want banjo-playing Belgians on our shores. Do you really think so?
Yes. I think they thought they were that stupid that they wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Yeah,
so they just said
right.
blanket
all
ban.
very sad.
I mean, look at the Rwanda thing. I mean, they do so many, things that are just not really well thought through, just to appease their base. That I think that's why they did it. In terms of my experience, it's not my personal experience. My partner is a conductor, and
what route?
Pardon? Yeah.
What route? Come on.
Well, he's more. I know, it's very funny. Yeah.
That deserved more, didn't it? That came from nowhere as well. Sorry, carry on, Susan.
Yeah, he's a conductor, and he actually has to have a spreadsheet now that tracks the number of days that he's in the EU. And he has to have it with him when he goes through border control because he's got so many stamps in his passport. So they're trying to figure out whether he's overstayed. And so he has to say, no, I've got X number of days. He has to show them
and that is what people don't understand, is that's causing border delays because lorry drivers have to do that as well, and tourists have to do that as well, and everybody has to do that as well. And previously they didn't have to do any of it.
Yeah, and at one point the woman actually didn't want to look at his spreadsheet. She said, I need to count all of your stamps. And she sat there and counted. I mean, he's going to need a new passport soon. That's how many stamps he has in his thing. And it was a brand new passport. And the thing is, it's
so
also
your partner is quite a big shot conductor then, clearly.
He is, yeah. And
cool.
And he's actually looking to see if he can set up some sort of business and get himself a visa somewhere, because in a country where he spends a lot of time, but it's not really useful.
You mean some sort of residency?
Yeah,
but
it's very difficult.
Well, I mean, would you consider moving?
Well, but the thing is, he also needs to be here because he does a lot of stuff in the UK.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because that's actually only one of the things that he does, because he does quite a lot of different things, and he's because he's a composer as well, and he does a whole lot of things, and he needs to be in the London area for a variety of things that he does. So we have,
what a mess! I mean, so.
Personally, can I just add one thing? So personally, it also impacts our ability to even travel, because now we can hardly take any holidays in Europe because he's concerned that if we actually go on holidays in Europe, he'll come.
He's used up all his days.
Yeah, because he doesn't want to have to turn down work.
Can I ask you?
I don't have enough days.
No, I completely understand. Can I ask you a question that you may have been asked before, and it may be a bit flippant, but I've always wanted to ask someone, and you're close to the action on this one. How can you tell the difference between a good conductor and a bad conductor?
Oh, he could answer that. I couldn't. I just tease him about waving his arms around.
That's what I've always thought. I go to quite a lot of live music, more actually, as I become more mature in my tastes. But I mean, how can you tell that someone is brilliant at it and less good at it?
I think it's the orchestra really that can tell more, because a good conductor can get them to instinctively know what you want and get them all playing together. I mean, like I said, I'm not the best person at describing it. It's just I have actually tried, because he has tried to teach me, and it's really hard.
Well, I'm not doubting that. I wouldn't, I'm not Eric Morecambe. I'm not suggesting for a minute that it's easy. I'm intrigued by, a sort of a Simon Rattle or someone compared to a bloke that I saw at Kidderminster Town Hall when I was a kid. What the golf? Go on.
When you can tell it when you hear it.
No, you can. Yeah, you're right.
Music,
you can.
And it's just like,
but I've always thought that was. I've always thought that was the musician's fault. I've always so our school orchestra was rubbish. They could have had the best conductor in the world in front of them, but the headmaster insisted on playing the tuba, Susan, and he dragged everybody else down with him. I look forward to finding out more about that. At 12:45 is the time. Thank you. I think that bus joke was brilliant. I can't believe that I didn't get more of a reaction for that. My partner is a conductor. What route? That's one of the best jokes I've ever done on the show, and everyone's looking at me blankly. It's not fair. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:48 is the time. I mean, the more you look at it, the madder it becomes. So they tried to claim, the UK government, you're going back to 2021, so Johnson's in the House, and that they tried to get the deal for musicians, and it was the other lot that turned it down, and then the EU turned up with the receipts and explained that it's perfectly normal for third countries, which is what we would be, to have a proposal to exempt performers from the huge cost and bureaucracy. But it was the British government that turned it down. Priti Patel was even warned that her so-called immigration crackdown will, and I quote, cut the legs off the UK music industry. It's true that Bruce Dickinson did vote for Brexit. It's also true that a couple of years later he was moaning about the difficulties that Iron Maiden were having touring in the European Union. I mean, oh, hello, chickens. Come home to roost, have you? I don't know whether this fella's ever recontributed to political discourse.
Brexit looks like it's getting further and further away. Is it going to be bad for British rock music?
No, we don't do the rock business. What's got to do with rock business?
Are they tour in Europe?
Oh dear, as if we didn't tour in Europe before the f***ing EU. Oh, give it up.
On that note.
Give it up.
Thank you very much, Betty. That's great. We're going to have to.
If you want to sign up to be ruled by a f***ing mafia, you do it.
Just a quick one.
Like being governed by FIFA.
What an absolute weapon. Roger Daltrey there. I just hope he doesn't get fooled again. Do you get it? What? Oh, forget. And I know buses don't have conductors anymore. That's not the point of the joke, is it? Danny's in Highgate. Danny, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello,
first time caller, but big fan.
Welcome, thank you.
As soon as you started saying this, I figured I just had to ring in. I've done 2 sort of 8-month type tours since Brexit. One of them was Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and one of them was UK and Ireland. And in both cases, it was a big enough company that they could sort of circumnavigate the additional paperwork. The Germany one was run by Live Nation.
Wow.
But even then, the contract and sort of additional employment hoops that we had to jump through were just insane. You know, it was like 30 pages of sort of contract stuff of something that should be so simple.
From nothing as well. This is the point that I think needs to be driven home. From nothing to all of that. It's not like a slow increase or, they've added a bit extra. You've gone from not having really to do any, from playing in Bonn would be the same as playing in Birmingham. And then suddenly it's exploded.
Yeah, and even then it caused like a sort of hiccup of like, was it going to be possible to hire UK musicians for this or was it not? And you know, it was a skin of teeth type thing.
Really?
And then even then, I had issues where I got sort of held up at the border on the way in, on the way out, because it was like, where's your work permit? And, you know, where's this, where's that?
Yeah.
And then we also had, for that, we had hired gear. So we weren't taking any of our own equipment. It was all bought there, you know, in Germany for the gig.
Which adds to your costs.
It didn't in one sense for us as individuals, but for the company, I'm sure it did. Then when I was on a UK tour and we went over to Derry and Dublin, that was taking our own equipment. And for that, we had to fill in a carnet. And, you know, I'm just one of the musicians, so I had to fill in a carnet for all of my personal equipment. But then you multiply that by the impact of, like, you've got wigs, wardrobe, sound, lighting, you know, the performers, all of the musical equipment, all the sound equipment, all the lighting equipment. And you had to fill in, you know, weight, serial number, brand, value, all of this stuff that didn't used to exist. And again, it's just come from nothing.
And so if you can't get on the roster with a massive company that's doing it, their margins are going to be sinking anyway. But you get on as you say, on with a massive promoter or a company that is absorbing it, or you don't go, really. You don't do it.
And that's it. Much like you've said before, and, you know, I've listened to you a lot on this, it's something that disproportionately affects the sort of lower end of things. You know, a massive company can get around it, but like a very new sort of, you know, underfunded band won't. And that's the parallel in lots of ways in which Brexit sort of affects our country and our society.
Absolutely crackers. Any thoughts on why on earth they didn't accept the opportunity to have an exemption for music? I guess I mean, I should be a bit more grown up than letting everybody suggest that they got kicked in the head by a horse. But it's because it would have created the idea, if you need an exemption from something, it must be bad, right?
Yeah, it's pure ideology. Again, I sort of think as well, and maybe this is just me, but you know, 99% of the musicians and sort of people who work in my industry that you meet think politically much like you or I would.
Sure.
You get the odd 1% who sort of goes says something that's completely incompatible with, actually the realities of working in our industry.
And then he gets thrown out of the Mumford Brothers.
Well, quite. But, most people think like you or I would, and then I sort of think it's just a sort of ideological and sort of a way to punish the industries who they see
I've got a theory. You've probably heard me share my theory on fascism and empathy, and that culture and art create empathy. And the last thing that politicians who are trying to turn you against refugees and indeed each other want is a population that's full of empathy. I don't think they think it through that deeply, Danny, but I do think you're right to suggest that it's a gear that's missing from their gearbox. Although, one imagines that they like the high-end stuff. They like the opera and the orchestras and the classical music, maybe of course they don't. They just pretend they do for social reasons, probably. I don't know. Danny, thank you. Peter is in Ampthill. Peter, what would you like to say?
Well, I just wanted to put my penneth in about what happens when you run out of your Schengen days and how much it can cost you. I've got a contract with La Monnaie Opera House, oddly enough, talking about opera. Now, I'm speaking to you from Nadine Dorries' country, by the way.
I just noticed that. Have you seen her? Have you seen her, Peter?
Nobody has seen her.
Nobody has seen her.
So what happens is you're about to run out of your days, or halfway through the contract, you run out of your days. And we're a third country now.
Yes.
So you have to go through a bit of a rigmarole to get what's called an artist's card and then a Schedule D visa. And I've just got a breakdown of exactly what it cost me. I had to get a police certificate to prove I wasn't a criminal.
Good grief.
And I had to get a medical examination, which was essentially just a blood test for Hep B and syphilis. Then I had to get I had to pay a Belgian embassy fee of 85 plus 250 plus 120 for the Belgian embassy fee, plus...
this is mad.
Yeah, of course it's mad. So a professional card was 140. The visa itself, the D visa, was 240, and it cost me about 113 train fares to do all this.
To go back and forth.
That's right, all the time. The grand total was £965 to get a visa to work at La Monnaie if you're running out of your free Schengen days.
Good
so
grief.
there it is. Yeah.
I don't know what to say. And again, I stress that before Brexit, none of it, not even some of it, but none of it would have applied.
Well, that's true. And of course, one of Johnson's more hilarious lies, and I quote from 2016 when he said, British people will still be able to go and work in the EU to live, to travel, to study, to buy homes and settle down. As the German equivalent of the CBI essentially reminded us, there will continue to be free trade and access to the single market.
You're very good at... Oddly, I think at the time he believed that. I think that's more an example of his epic ignorance than his epic dishonesty. But
well, when I was 4, I believed in the tooth fairy, didn't I? So
indeed you did, Peter. Indeed you did. But on the other hand, as Johnson might say, did you or did you not find a shiny new coin under your pillow when you woke up in the morning?
Yeah, indeed,
dear. Yeah. What are you doing at La Monnaie?
La Monnaie, we're doing Das Rheingold by Wagner. So
sensational. What do you sing?
I'm singing Mime and that, and then in Siegfried later on as well. But it's just appalling.
You're the real deal. You're the real deal, aren't you, Peter?
Do you know it feels like we're actually being targeted deliberately.
Well, you're the second musician to say that.
Look what happens to music in schools. The county music services were torn apart in the late 2000s. The music was taken off the core curriculum. School in Leeds just now, I have a quote from a parent who said that only 4 schools in the whole of the Leeds area were offering A-level music this year.
I think again. God, it could be a deliberate assault upon the arts, but it might just be we need to save a few quid. What do we care about least? I know they have the same result, but they come from slightly different places. Not that
the thing is, if we're not our culture, what the hell are we?
That is out. It's almost like we planned it. But crikey, if we're not our culture, what the hell are we? Well, I'll tell you who you can ask, Peter.
Nadine, if I ever find her.
She was Secretary of State. God help us all for culture, media and sport. We haven't even done Dorries. watch today. Thank you. Gosh, what an erudite bunch we have listening to the programme. If you missed any of today's shows, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also rewind live radio. You'll find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as stay up to date with the latest news from LBC. Tomorrow, of course, from 10, speak to Sadiq. It's going to be ULEZ-tastic. And don't forget to go to Global Player. Download the app for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4, Ben Kentish sitting in for Tom Swarbrick. And coming up now, Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.